In a dark corner of the world, the mayor of a town dragged two people out of a sealed cellar and handed them over to some other men. One of the men asked for their price, which was 5 silver coins. And with a look of disgust, he bought them, thinking he could just toss them off to someone else. Afterward, the villagers nearby didn't seem to object, as they were just glad that their village was finally rid of those who served evil gods. Meanwhile, people in this world still wondered why they could use magic from ancient times, but there was never an answer. So they continued to chant their favorite magic spells for various purposes at different times, including in times of war. Right now, somewhere in a dark forest, a mercenary mage was chanting a spell to attack some other guys, but as he was focusing on his magic, a sword pierced straight through his head. This just goes to show that while magic is powerful, it's not always invincible. If a sword flies straight at a caster, they'll die, just like this mage did. Aldous, with a terrifyingly sharp gaze, was fighting several assassins who had apparently come to take his life. When he asked them who they were and why they were attacking him, suddenly one assassin couldn't answer, terrified by the deaths of the others caused by this powerful sword magic. Aldous targeted the assassin with more swords to keep him from escaping, but in the end, he killed him, realizing there was no point in keeping the man alive. However, more assassins were still hiding in the trees, and though they launched a surprise attack on Aldous, he easily blocked it with his sword. The assassin was shocked to be discovered, but for Aldous, it was nothing. He could clearly sense the killer's bloodlust from the start. Aldous didn't really want to kill anyone, but even though this assassin wasn't taken down immediately, he still attacked Aldous with his own style of swordsmanship. Not wanting to waste time, Aldous sent the man's sword flying, leaving him vulnerable and wondering how a mage could have such skill. Aldous cut his thoughts short with a definitive answer. He wasn't a mage, but a swordsman, and then he swung his sword through the assassin's neck. Afterward, he left the forest and returned to the port town of Thoria, a place that prospered thanks to the blessings of the forest and its coastal trade. It was the second largest town in the kingdom of Nagras. As soon as he arrived, Aldous reported the attack to his friends in the mercenary group and their leader, Ted. Ted asked if he'd really killed them all, without getting any information. Aldous replied that there was no point in keeping one alive for information since they were after his life anyway, so killing them was the logical choice. Ted explained to Aldous that it would have been better to gather some intel, but for Aldous, he just didn't want the hassle and preferred to end things quickly. His teammates, like Norris the archer and Orphelia the mage, knew Aldous was a brute who often killed his enemies ruthlessly instead of using his abilities to their fullest. They asked if he knew who the attackers were, and Aldous said no. Other than that, they seemed to know about his sword magic. Orphelia pointed out that if they knew about that, there was a high chance they were connected to the military. Hearing the word military, Aldous recalled the trouble he'd caused with a certain general who had tried to convince Aldous to join the army. Aldous had flatly refused the general, saying he was under no obligation to teach his sword magic to the military. The general had asked how he dared to speak to him that way. The general had actually learned of Aldous while he was on a mission escorting a merchant, during which a battle broke out between the army and some bandits. The bandits were far more numerous, and it seemed the soldiers were having a hard time. Some of the bandits tried to rob the merchant Aldous was escorting at the time. Aldous used his sword magic to take care of them. And news of this caught the general's attention, leading him to approach Aldous with an invitation to join the army. The general said that joining the military meant a better income and guaranteed daily necessities, something Aldous couldn't have as an ordinary person. However, Aldous couldn't have cared less. To mock the general, he demanded he sign a contract if he really wanted him to join, for a fee of 500 gold coins a month. Hearing this, the general became furious, as this amount was 500 times his own salary. His soldiers advised him to calm down, while Aldous simply walked away and went back to his work instead of wasting any more time there. He figured the general was the one being arrogant towards him, so he refused, and also made it clear that his sword magic couldn't be taught to others. Even so, Orphelia said he still shouldn't have rejected the general so rudely by humiliating him in front of everyone like that, which would only make the general hold a grudge against him. Norris laughed and agreed that it was because of things like this that Aldous made more enemies as usual. Ted told him not to laugh about it, and Ted admitted to Aldous that his strength was indeed terrifying, but he shouldn't be making so many enemies. Aldous understood what Ted meant, and since he was indebted to him and the others, he didn't want to cause them any trouble, so he agreed to be on his best behavior when dealing with the nobles and the church, but they all knew how difficult that would be. Ted bet 3 copper coins that Aldous wouldn't show a shred of discipline. Ophelia joined in, betting 5 copper coins that Aldous would have no discipline due to his awkwardness. Norris immediately bet a whole silver coin on Aldous without even knowing what discipline was. After that, they set off for the Caucasus Forest, located south of Thoria. This forest had been a vital source of fuel, food, and medicinal herbs since ancient times, becoming a pillar that supported the growth of the town of Thoria. However, it was also home to many wild animals and unexplored regions where monsters dwelled. Ted and his party came to this forest on a request to find a good spot for logging. To fulfill this request, they needed to venture into the parts of the forest inhabited by monsters. Ophelia found a spot where they wouldn't run into any problems, as the path seemed to be well maintained and was also close to the main road. She mentioned that the quality of the trees here was also excellent, so they should choose this location. Ted announced to everyone that it was decided, so now they needed to get to work clearing out the monsters in the area, starting by taking out the nearby nest of Twin Blades beast. He then yelled over to Aldous, telling him to pay more attention. Aldous replied that this was mainly their request, and since he was just tagging along for a bit, it didn't really have much to do with him. Ophelia reminded him that it was never too late to join them, and since they had already teamed up so many times, Aldous was starting to feel like he was part of the group. Aldous said he would think about it, after which Ophelia asked if he still hadn't given up on finding his old companions. Ophelia tried to make him understand that a year had already passed, and if he hadn't found a single clue, she wanted him to realize what that implied. However, Aldous retorted that it had only been a year, which was just a short time to be searching for his friends. Ophelia wished he would just understand, but Aldous remained fixated on his old party. Suddenly they heard a cry from the distance, echoing and pleading for help. Norris wondered if someone was being attacked nearby, but Ted didn't wait around. He immediately dashed toward the sound of the cry without even thinking about a plan. Ophelia and Norris knew they had to follow Ted, even though it was just like him to always jump in to help people. They all loved that kindness about Ted, so they smiled and followed right behind him. As they went deeper into the forest, they found a large group of bandits who had apparently killed some passing merchants and seized their carriage. They all alerted each other to the bandits, and Ted realized they had arrived too late. Suddenly, the bandits' archers started firing arrows at Ted and the others. Ted moved forward using his sword and shield to block the arrows. He knew the bandits wouldn't let them go easily, so they engaged in the fight. Norris then asked Aldous to cover him while he fired his arrows, and Aldous used his sword magic to slice through every incoming arrow without fail. Just when the bandits thought they had them cornered, Norris knew exactly who to target, so he took aim at one of the bandits and sent an arrow into his chest. Ophelia asked Ted for the signal to use her magic, but Ted replied that it wasn't the right time yet. Meanwhile, on the bandits' side, their leader was getting desperate, ordering everyone to charge and take out the archer and the wizard, referring to Aldous. Aldous took that personally, and just to let the bandits know he wasn't a wizard, he threw several swords behind the bandits and used his sword magic to run one of them through the head. However, it didn't stop there, as he manipulated that same sword to swing around, slashing the necks of the other bandits. Meanwhile, Ted was fighting the bandit leader head-on. The leader was busy fighting Ted, but when he thought about sending his other men to attack the archer and the wizard, he realized all of them were already dead. He was stunned to see how they had been killed. Ted told him he was the last one standing, and then finished the leader off. Afterward, they checked the bodies of the dead merchants along with the group that was supposed to be protecting them. Norris noted there was nothing more they could do, so they should just take what they could and head back. Ted agreed and told them to avoid carrying anything too heavy. Norris told Aldous to come with him to check the carriage, but when he got there expecting to find some jewels or treasure, he was shocked by what he saw inside the carriage. Aldous asked him what was wrong. Then Norris stepped out, and Aldous went to check the carriage himself. When he looked inside, he saw 2 little girls, chained by their hands and feet, with haunted looks in their eyes. Ted got the children out, feeling bewildered by the scene, because this had made their situation even more complicated. Aldous thought they might be child slaves, so he suggested to Ted that they should take the children back to town. Ted exclaimed that he needed to think about what to do, because not only were these children slaves, but they were also twins, which made things even worse. Aldous asked them what object slaves were, which surprised everyone. Ted asked him if he really didn't know what that meant. Norris laughed because he had also found all of this strange at first. Then Norris explained that object slaves were essentially people bought and sold for money. They could be anyone, from children sold by their parents to criminals or prisoners of war, and the shackles on them restricted their freedom. They also had no legal protection as they were considered objects. Aldous asked if they were any different from regular slaves, and Norris replied that slaves were still considered human, whereas object slaves were seen as complete objects. They could be treated however their master wished, like having their limbs cut off or anything else, including taking their lives. Norris said that if a person mistreated their slave, their reputation would suffer, but if they mistreated an object slave, people would simply say they were managing their product poorly. In a way, object slaves didn't even have the right to wear clothes. Ted added that the fact that these two were twins was another issue Aldous wasn't aware of. Ted asked Aldous where he could have possibly grown up on not to know something so common, explaining that twins were considered taboo children, believed to be disciples of evil gods who brought disaster upon the goddess. Aldous knew this didn't make much sense, as Orphelia had informed him that the goddess was known as the greatest being in this world, the creator of the earth who loved life. However, during the previous war in the divine realm, an evil god named Grace had confronted the goddess, and the ones who had wounded the goddess were vanguards known as the Two Demons. Aldous' expression changed slightly upon hearing about the two demons. Ted then told him not to make such a scary face, thinking Aldous might hate the goddess. But putting that aside, Orphelia said that the church considered all twins to carry an unforgivable sin. Aldous asked her if she believed in such a story, and she replied that as far as she was concerned, it was just a myth. But regardless, life here was truly harsh for any pair of twins. Finally, as night approached, they decided to take the twins with them, a decision made mostly by Aldous. Ted said that was probably for the best, as he hadn't wanted to leave them there alone either. However, Ted also mentioned that if these kids were normal, they could sell them in town, but since they were twins, no one would want to buy them, as twins were usually discarded at birth. Aldous asked what would happen to the children if they couldn't find a buyer, and they answered that unsold goods would be killed, or at the very least, whatever happened to them wouldn't be good. Aldous insisted on an example, making everyone realize that he was planning to take the twins with him. Norris replied that first of all, the children wouldn't be treated well at all. Not only that, but with the shackles on their legs, they couldn't even walk properly. Aldous figured if that was the problem, he approached the children and used 3 spells derived from formula analysis: disarm trap, remove shackles, and synchronized power release on all of the chains. Then, Orphelia ran over worriedly, calling Aldous' name to tell him that the shackles of object slaves couldn't be removed so easily, because the shackles were all linked together. They were set up so that if one was removed, the others would burst into flames. But by the time her explanation reached Aldous, he had already removed all the shackles from the twins' hands and feet. Everyone was stunned by the sight, while Aldous acted as if it was no big deal. He explained he had removed all 3 at the same time to ensure they wouldn't activate. Ted and Norris started laughing at yet another one of Aldous' strange actions. Meanwhile, Orphelia shouted, asking how that was possible. She demanded that Aldous explain how he did it, and he replied that he simply released them all at once. She said that casting multiple spells at once was impossible, especially without any incantations. Aldous asked Orphelia why she thought incantations were necessary to use magic, since it was much more flexible not to have to use such roundabout methods. Aldous then stood up and declared that he would be taking the twins with him, and that he himself would be responsible for them. Ted and Norris asked if he was serious, while Aldous said he would give up his share of the goods from the cart in exchange for this. Ted tried to get him to reconsider since there was nothing in it for him. Aldous admitted that it was true he gained nothing from this, but if what Orphelia had said earlier was correct, he felt it would be too irresponsible to abandon these children. Ted told him to do as he pleased, adding that it wasn't so bad since he hadn't wanted to abandon the children either. Aldous apologized for the trouble, and he also assured the twins that he would never leave these collars on them again. After that, he went to sleep while the twins wondered what was happening, since this was something that had never happened to them before. The next day, they left to return to town, and on the way, Aldous told Orphelia that using incantations to summon magic was just a misunderstanding on the part of the mages. He used the example of a swordsman who doesn't need to shout to use his techniques. Orphelia said that magic is completely different from swordsmanship. Aldous asked if that were the case, why their bodies moved at will without any chanting or processing. She couldn't argue with that, while Ted added that this was interesting, since no one had ever really questioned why their bodies could move at will before. Norris asked if this meant that using magic was as easy for Aldous as walking was for them, to which Aldous replied that it was pretty accurate. Ophelia still wasn't used to it, as using 4 different spells at once was still difficult to pull off. Norris said they should try to get Aldous into their party because letting someone as unusual as him get away would be a waste. Ted also said he'd welcome it with open arms. Aldous simply replied that he'd think about it. Ted asked everyone not to let anyone know about the 2 children, as it could attract more trouble for them. Aldous remembered that he still had to take care of the 2 kids, as they were still scared and clinging to each other. Aldous gave them some children's dresses he found in the carriage. Although there was still a lot of uncertainty, it wasn't long before the gates of Thoria Town came into view. However, when the guards at the gate saw the 2 children, their reaction was anything but normal. Instead, they looked angry. Norris approached the guards and asked them not to look at the 2 children so angrily, as they were only escorting them. But the guards insisted that bringing twins into the town would cause chaos. Inside the town, Norris went up to the guards and discreetly slipped some money into their hands. The guards understood the meaning behind it, and the guards told them not to cause any trouble inside. With that taken care of, Aldous was able to enter the town with the 2 children. As they entered, Norris called out to Aldous, asking him to pay him back the money he used for the guards. Norris warned Aldous again that he needed to be more careful when he was with the 2 children, and to try not to make any more enemies. Aldous thanked him for his help, and Ted replied that it was nothing to worry about. They would now head back to report their findings. Ophelia told Aldous that if he needed help with anything that required a woman's touch, she would help as much as she could. After that, they left, and now Aldous thought he should head back to the inn where he usually stayed, hoping they would have enough room for the 2 children. Suddenly, Aldous heard a man shout upon seeing the twins. When everyone else noticed, they started asking why there were twins in this town. They called it a disgusting sight, and as night fell, Aldous was forced to keep moving from one end to another. He hadn't expected things to be this bad, because when he returned to his inn, the owner kicked him out just for having the 2 children with him. She didn't want to keep them, even though Aldous offered to pay for them. She acted as if Aldous had some kind of grudge against her, bringing twins to her establishment. Everywhere he went, people seemed to have a grudge against twins, which was worse than Aldous had imagined. He looked at the 2 children, saw that they looked like they couldn't take any more of this hatred, and thought he needed to do something quickly. Then a girl called out to him and asked if he was looking for a place to stay. If so, she invited him to stay at her inn. Aldous replied that he'd be glad to stay, but the more important question was whether the 2 children with him could come along. The girl initially said that bringing children wasn't a problem, but when she realized they were actually twins, she was taken aback for a moment. After a while, Aldous entered the room with food in his hands, remembering how the girl had let him stay, albeit at double the normal price. At least she wasn't a bad person. Now Aldous placed the food on the table and told the 2 children to come eat before it got cold. But Aldous noticed that while he was eating, the 2 children didn't seem to be coming over to eat. So he finished his own meal and went to bed, leaving the food on the table. After a few hours, Aldous couldn't sleep because he was worried about the 2 children. He got up to check if they had fallen asleep without eating, but luckily the plates on the table were clean, meaning the children had eaten. After going back to bed, Aldous wondered if perhaps they couldn't eat properly when someone was staring at them. He then noticed that the 2 children were shivering from the cold and were still huddled closely together. Aldous couldn't help but imagine what kind of treatment they had endured up until now. Just because they were twins, Aldous felt sad for them, so he put a blanket over them, while promising himself he would protect them both. These children didn't have a good past, as Aldous realized, because even though they had lived together for a long time, they had been through many harsh situations. However, things weren't always like this. The 2 children only began to realize they weren't normal after they disobeyed their mother's warning and snuck outside to play. When people saw them, they started throwing stones at them, and they realized that because of their very existence as twins, they were despised by everyone. Their parents cried when they found out and held the 2 children tightly, apologizing to them. After that, they didn't dare sneak out again, haunted by the memory of the outside world. But their peaceful life soon came to an end, when their village was attacked by a beast, killing their father. As for their mother, she did her best to raise the 2 children alone, and in the process, she overworked herself until she fell gravely ill and passed away half a year later. That was the day the suffering in the twin children's lives began. When the door burst open, a group of people from the village appeared. They captured the 2 children and locked them in a hut until they could find a buyer. Even as they were deemed slaves of the evil goods, the girls hadn't even had time to grieve their mother's loss. Half a month later, they were taken out of the hut and chained by the legs before being sold to others. The 2 children could never forget the contemptuous looks from the villagers. From then on, they lived their days imprisoned in a traveling carriage. Every time they arrived in a new town, they were handed over to someone else. Though their handlers changed, the treatment of the two children never did. At some point, they were kept covered with a cloth and were only fed pieces of stale, rotten bread, usually only when a man came to visit. They hoped this would be the end of their suffering, but in reality, it only brought more torture and beatings from that person. The two children wondered why they were being treated this way. They couldn't understand the reason, lacking knowledge and experience. In the end, all they came to understand was that they were called slaves of the evil god. And if they didn't resist, they wouldn't be beaten by the adults. Besides being given a little food occasionally, they just wished they could go home and see their parents again. But there was nothing left for them to return to. Even as children, they had to endure such fears, wondering if they showed emotion or cried, would they be beaten again? Or if they talked back, would they be punished? And so, the two children completely shut themselves off and remained silent. The only thing the two sisters could do was cling to the last bit of warmth by holding each other tightly, suppressing their emotions. That was all these poor children could do, until one day things began to change. That change happened when Aldous found the two sisters. The first time they saw Aldous, they thought the person who had tortured them had appeared once again. However, for some reason, Aldous's eyes reminded them of their parents. It was only later that they realized Aldous didn't hate them at all. He was the one who removed their shackles, carried them on his back, and even gave them plenty of food and a place to live. The sisters didn't know how to react when Aldous offered them food. They thought he might hit them if they dared to touch it. They saw the worried look on Aldous's face, and when he went to bed without clearing the table, the two sisters began to eat. That was the first day they were able to sleep soundly, freed from the pain of hunger. The two sisters' lives were still filled with anxiety, but this was just the beginning of an interesting life for the boy and the two sisters. From their perspective, the boy would go out in the morning and return in the evening. He told them to sit and eat with him, but the two sisters were still too afraid to move. Even so, they loved living in a warm room, where they could eat their fill without anything scary or painful happening to them. It was like a dream come true. The only time the two sisters felt scared was when they had to leave the room to use the toilet, and other people saw them. The sisters overheard people telling each other they should avoid being seen together. But since they were each other's only family and ally, they couldn't bear to be separated, even for a moment. Now, on this particular night, Aldous brought food for the two sisters as usual, and the two sisters sat in a corner. He thought that nothing would be different from any other day if he didn't do something about the situation. So Aldous went and sat down next to the two sisters. He took some food and told one of the sisters to open her mouth. The girl hesitated, but when she saw the kind smile on his face, she opened her mouth for Aldous to feed her. She enjoyed eating the food while Aldous fed her younger sister with a spoon. He told them to take their time eating, and then realized the two sisters were actually crying. He asked if the food was too hot, but regardless, after that incident, the sisters were finally able to eat with him. They wondered what Aldous meant to them, and then he thought it was a good time to ask for the sisters' names. For the first time, the sisters answered. The girl on the right was named Philia, and the one on the left was Rihanna. After half a month had passed, Aldous informed them that they would be leaving the inn. Philia and Rihanna saw him talking to the innkeeper about it, and it was clear they had to leave because the sisters had been seen by someone else. Aldous told the sisters that he had rented a house and would take them there. Aldous's house was located just outside of town, and he assured them that they could feel comfortable here. Aldous said they didn't need to worry about being seen, so they could run, jump, and play freely. When asked, the two sisters expressed that they liked this place more. After moving into the new house, the sisters became less anxious, but they still couldn't talk comfortably with Aldous. Trouble struck one day when Aldous returned home, and was surprised to find Rihanna wasn't well. They tried to wake her and ask what was wrong. After putting Rihanna in bed and checking on her, Aldous discovered she had a fever. Aldous hoped that Rihanna's condition wasn't serious, and while he couldn't rely on the healers from the church or Ted's group who were away on a mission, he knew he had to do something himself. Philia begged Aldous to do something to help Rihanna's condition, or else she would die. Seeing her worried expression, Aldous thought hard until he remembered someone once told him you could bring down a fever by cooling the person's head. Aldous got a damp cloth and placed it on Rihanna's head, then mixed some medicine into a rice ball and slowly fed it to her. Philia wondered why Aldous was doing so much for them, and seeing her nervous expression, he asked her what was wrong. Philia couldn't stop herself from asking why Aldous treated them so kindly. Even though they were servants of the evil god, she told him she had heard from everyone that they were enemies of the goddess, and that anyone who treated them kindly would be cursed. She couldn't control her trembling, as she hadn't dared to ask anything of her own free will in a long time. Aldous felt responsible and told her that he knew Philia and Rihanna were not servants of the evil god. Philia didn't expect that answer, as he sat down and told her that everyone had been deceived by the goddess, and that she was just a normal human being like everyone else. He explained that the reason her parents had treated them kindly was because they also knew the truth, that she and Rihanna weren't servants of the evil god, but their own children. Philia recalled that her mother had cried before, and that was probably the reason why. Aldous assured her that he knew that too, so he would do everything to protect both girls. He didn't want Philia to call herself a servant of the evil god anymore, because she and Rihanna had never done anything wrong. Philia and Rihanna cried with relief that day, and Aldous grew closer to the two girls. The next day, Rihanna's fever had gone down, but then Philia came down with a fever. During this time, Aldous stayed by their side until they had fully recovered. He felt glad because this time, the two sisters were able to sleep more peacefully than ever before. Meanwhile, on some plains, a woman stood on a path that people often traveled. She had a strong feeling that what she was looking for would soon appear here, so she decided to stay in that spot. Back at Aldous's house, he was now used to being welcomed by the girls whenever he came home. They would often ask for food when they were hungry. He would then tell them he'd prepare food right away. And he'd start peeling apples. The girls were always by his side as if he were their safe place. At night, Aldous would often read them stories until they fell asleep. But whenever Aldous went back to his bed and lay down, he'd find the girls right beside him. The next day, he brought them some grilled meat skewers, and it was the first time the girls had ever tasted this dish. They eagerly chewed on the grilled skewers, and when Aldous asked if they liked the food, they showed their delight with smiles on their faces. For Aldous, it felt like it had been a very long time since he'd been able to experience such peaceful moments. However, he still ran into some problems, as Ted and the others came to Aldous's house to ask if he was going to start working again. Aldous reminded Ted not to get near the children with his scary face, while Ted's concern came from the fact that Aldous had been turning down all recent job offers, as if he didn't want to make money anymore. They were worried about him, but at the same time, they were happy to see that Aldous seemed to be getting along with the girls. Norris asked if Aldous was okay and suggested he should start working again, while also bringing him some interesting information. Norris asked Aldous if he had heard about the beautiful woman who had appeared on the main road. Aldous knew nothing about it, while rumors had already spread throughout the town of Thoria. When someone travels from Thoria to the capital about half a day later, they'll come across a young woman standing there, all alone. It's said that she's challenged every mercenary who passes by and, without a doubt, has defeated them all. Aldous asked if she was a bandit, but Norris replied that the woman doesn't take anything. Even when she challenges people, no one has actually died or been injured. If people refuse the challenge, she just lets them pass. Norris said she's very strong, but seems to be a harmless eccentric, and aside from a few people, no one sees her as a problem. Aldous asked why some people found it to be a problem, and Norris answered that it was because of their pride. If they let an oddball like that exist, they wouldn't be able to walk with their heads held high. Aldous understood that the client was the Lord of Thoria, and while the woman on the road refused to give her name or any information, the request from the Lord was to negotiate with her and bring her to his mansion. Aldous asked why the Lord would want to hire mercenaries when he could just assign his own soldiers. Norris said that the Lord might not want to send his own envoys, or had already been rejected before. The reward for this request is 2 gold coins. Aldous said that was too little for 4 people, but the others replied that they were actually handling other requests and were giving this one to Aldous because they thought it would be good for him. Philia and Rihanna asked if he was going out. Aldous asked them in return if they could stay home and wait for him. He assured them that he would be back and told them not to worry. After that, he left and headed straight for the requested location at an incredible speed. He figured it would normally take about 2 hours to get there. But to get there faster, he used flight magic while pretending to run, so that others wouldn't find him strange. Because in this world, using flight magic or non-verbal spells was something out of the ordinary. Meanwhile, some random mercenaries were being defeated one after another, leaving the onlookers shocked to see the woman take down 10 men with ease. At that moment, Aldous arrived and quickly came to a stop. Before Aldous could get any closer to the others, the woman was a little disappointed that she couldn't find anyone who could last against her for even 10 seconds. Without delay, she asked if anyone else wanted to challenge her, and that she wouldn't mind if they all attacked her at once. She stood there, ready to crush them. One mercenary stepped up to challenge her, and the others hoped he could give the woman an interesting fight. The mercenary Gandalf declared that he had been using weapons since before she was even born. Hearing this, the woman named Nale drew a small knife. Gandalf charged straight at her with his spear, but she suddenly vanished from his sight and instantly appeared right on top of his spear. Nale rushed forward with incredible speed and placed the knife at Gandalf's neck, declaring it her victory. The surrounding mercenaries were stunned to see Nale's true power, and Aldous was among them, unable to believe his eyes. Because no matter how you looked at it, the speed Nale displayed was clearly not something an ordinary person could achieve. Nal once again asked if anyone else wanted to challenge her. Then Aldous excused himself through the crowd and stepped forward, approaching Nale. The others tried to warn Aldous, but he kept walking. This made Nale think that he was her next opponent. She smiled, preparing for the next battle. But Aldous clearly told her that he came to negotiate and had no intention of fighting. Nale grew angry hearing that, and while Aldous tried to reason with her, Nale threw a knife at him without any warning. Aldous used a transparent shield magic to block the blade, and he demanded that Nale listen to what he had to say. Aldous told her that aiming for the throat of someone who came to negotiate wasn't exactly a friendly gesture. Nale replied that she had no interest in talking to him, but if he really wanted her to listen, then Aldous would have to convince her through combat. Aldous understood that what Nale really wanted was a fight, while Nale warned him that he could convince her simply by defeating her. As Nale charged forward, intending to end it quickly, Aldous used earth magic to form an earthen wall, but Nale easily broke through it and said she'd make better use of those rocks. Nal formed throwable stones from the debris, which struck Aldous as unusual. But before he could react, Nale fired the sharp stones at him. Aldous used his magic shield to block them all. Suddenly, a fire magic attack rushed at him from his blind spot, but Aldous managed to dodge it thanks to his agility. Aldous quickly sensed Nale's presence behind him, so he flipped in mid-air to evade her line of attack. Nale, realizing Aldous was quite skilled, decided to step things up by firing a direct wind attack at him before he could even regain his footing. Aldous knew he'd be in trouble if he took that attack head-on. Therefore, he crouched and used his shield magic at an angle to repel Nale's attack, redirecting it elsewhere. She asked him just who he was, and Aldous had the same question for her. Meanwhile, the onlookers were all surprised to learn that Nale was a mage, and that Aldous was holding his own against her. This was the first time Aldous had seen someone other than himself use magic without chanting, which truly made him question her identity. Their fight grew more intense over time, as Nale showed no signs of holding back against Aldous, while he was trying to fight with feigned techniques, just to make sure the people around them wouldn't grow suspicious of him. Nal noticed this, so she asked him why he had to pretend to use fake spells just to hold back his power. But when she glanced at the onlookers, she understood that he wanted to keep it a secret, so Nale decided to get rid of all of them, and used wind magic to blow all the mercenaries hundreds of meters away. Aldous stood his ground, watching as the others were swept away. Nale noticed there were still a few people left nearby, and deciding that wasn't enough, she created an even larger magic attack. Seeing this, Aldous watched as everyone fled from the two of them as fast as they could. Nale launched the attack at Aldous, and to counter it, he created a sharp magic shield that sliced Nale's attack apart. She told him he could go all out now, since she'd removed the obstacles. Aldous replied that it was pointless asking her to negotiate. Even so, Nale said that hadn't changed, and he would still have to defeat her to make her listen. Now, Aldous decided to fight for real as he drew his swords, which gave Nale a better understanding of his fighting style. Aldous' swords flew around him thanks to his sword magic, as he asked Nale if she still wanted him to go all out. He warned her to try not to be defeated too quickly. As he sent all the swords down to attack her, Nal struggled to block all the swords flying toward her, as they seemed to be endless. She tried to repel them with her own swords, and then used a shield to block them. But there were still many swords she couldn't avoid. She wondered what would happen if she simply destroyed the area, and as she did so, Aldous himself had to shield himself from the flying rocks. Nale flew over Aldous' head and charged in, attacking with multiple light magic strikes. Seeing this, Aldous did the same, and the two of them stared at each other with defiant eyes. They both unleashed powerful magic attacks, with neither of them holding back. When their attacks collided, a huge explosion occurred, even bigger than the last one. After the explosion settled and the dust began to clear, Nale landed on the ground, coughing, but she had no time to catch her breath. Aldous quickly rushed in with his sword in hand, and Nale managed to block him. Their battle had shifted to a close-quarters sword fight, and Nale was surprised to realize that he was actually a swordsman. Aldous was happy that someone finally saw him for what he was. and with his neck slashed, he sent Nail's daggers flying and pointed his sword at her neck. Aldous had defeated Nail without injuring her. Then he asked if she was satisfied with that outcome. Nala knew she had lost, so she smiled and called Aldous milord. Aldous didn't understand what she meant, but he knew asking wouldn't do much good. Meanwhile, in the town of Thoria, the twins were out exploring again, out of curiosity. They wanted to wander through the town just once, and the peaceful life had made them let their guard down. Philia and Rihanna were excited to see so many people and large houses all around. Philia ran ahead of Rihanna in her excitement, but she suddenly tripped and fell. An old man approached and asked if she was okay, checking to see if she was hurt. When he saw her sister next to her, he asked which one of them was the older sister. The old man smiled as he remarked that they looked very similar, but he also felt something was strange because they looked too alike. When he learned they were twins, the old man was surprised and looked around, then told the girls it must be difficult for them to live like this. Looking at the two with pity in his eyes, the old man warned them to make sure they always kept their hoods on and to leave immediately, and he specifically told them not to let anyone see their faces. That was the first time the girls realized there might be other kind people besides Aldous. Back to Aldous, Nail admitted that she hadn't expected Aldous to be so strong. While Aldous was still wondering who Nail was referring to, she confirmed she was talking about him. Nail thought that Aldous was the one who had surpassed the limits of humanity. And now that she had found him, she felt that Aldous was worthy of being her lord, and she would serve under him. Aldous wanted to stay away from any involvement with Nayle, and he asked who she was. He also pointed out that her power was similar to his. He asked Nail if she was like him. Nala replied that she didn't understand what he meant, which made Aldous feel like she was dodging his question. Nayle told him she was just his faithful servant, nothing more, nothing less. She assured Aldous that she would always answer his summons, but that only made him feel like she was more trouble than anything else. Aldous repeated that he only came here to ask her to visit the Lord of Thoria. Nale replied that if it was an order, she would agree. Aldous realized there were many things he needed to discuss with her, but this request was the top priority for now. Nail said she would first repair the damage caused by their fight. She used her magic to fill in all the holes, restoring everything to how it was before. The surrounding landscape looked as if no battle had ever taken place. Witnessing her skill, Aldous realized he could do the same, but for someone other than himself to be able to do this without an incantation was bizarre. Nail told Aldous that the job was complete. Afterward, Aldous kept his guard up around her, until he led her to Lord Thoria's mansion. The guard at the gate confirmed that she was the one who had been described, so he agreed to let her in. And Aldous no longer needed to accompany her. The soldier gave Aldous his reward. However, Nail was not happy to see that her master was not going with her. Aldous explained that his only task was to bring her here. Nal didn't want to go to a place that had nothing to do with her lord, so she refused to go as she didn't care about this place or even Lord Thoria. Aldous had to ask her to wait. Nail said that if this was an order, she would have no problem obeying, so she asked him to confirm if it was indeed an order. Aldous was confused for a moment, then figured if all it took was an order to get her to listen, he would do it. Aldous told her it was an order and requested that Nayle meet with the Lord. Nal followed his command and immediately agreed. After that, she headed to the mansion alone. While heading back to town, Aldous thought about how truly vast the world was, since he had never met anyone who could fight on his level like Nayle. Meeting her was a first, and there was always a chance someone stronger than her existed somewhere, someone Aldous had yet to encounter. However, he wanted to look after himself, because there were now people he needed to care for. Aldous returned home and, as usual, was warmly welcomed by Philia and Rihanna. The girls told him that they had made their own lunch today, and brought him some sandwiches. Aldous was happy to see their smiling faces, so he told them they should all eat together. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and he told the two of them to quickly hide. When he opened the door, Aldous saw Nayle and asked her why she was here. Nayle announced that she had come to report the completion of his order. Aldous wondered what she was talking about until she reminded him about meeting the Lord. Aldous then remembered that had happened. Not wanting to waste any more time with her, he said goodbye and tried to close the door. But Nayle stuck her foot in the doorway and asked if there were any other orders. Aldous continued to refuse her, but she stood her ground, insistent on protecting him from inside. Aldous thought that Nayle was trying to get him to rent a room to her. He told her that if she was short on money, he would pay for her to stay at an inn. Nayle insisted she wasn't lacking money. She simply wanted to be by his side in case of an emergency. Aldous shut the door, not wanting to let Nayle in the house because of the girls. Nolly said that she would stay outside the door and keep watch. And so she stood there, while Aldis later learned that Nail had been incredibly rude to Lord Thoria, refusing challenges from the soldiers who wanted to verify her strength. Nolly had also refused the Lord's offer to become his personal bodyguard, and her rude attitude had earned her their animosity. Although Aldis had returned to his peaceful life the next morning, he was preparing breakfast for the girls. Philia quickly sat down and began to eat in a hurry, but she burned her tongue on the hot food. Aldis reminded her to eat slowly like Rihanna, and as he looked closely at her, he imagined she was eating just like a squirrel. Their peaceful breakfast went on without a hitch, except for one thing. Nal was still standing outside their house. Philia asked him if that white-haired woman was still outside, and he told the girls to be careful not to let her see them. Aldis was still wary of how Nail addressed him. But regardless, Nail always stood guard at the gate, and whenever Aldis went out, she would follow, sometimes even helping him with his hunts and other tasks. She made his hunts more efficient, and even though he barely knew her, she was reliable. Gradually, a strange sense of trust was established between them. And Aldis wondered if it was really okay to let things go on like this. Then, it started to rain, and Aldis saw the girls looking out the window, worried about Nail getting wet outside. Nala didn't leave her post to stand guard for her master, and the girls were concerned that she didn't have a home or a bed to rest in. Aldis was also shocked to see that she didn't take a break even on rainy days like this. Then, the girls came and handed him a towel to give to Nale, because she must be cold, and being cold is hard, just like not having a home is. Aldis couldn't help but go along with what the kind-hearted girls wanted, so he understood and told them to go back to the room in the back. Then, Aldis went to Nail, and she greeted him good morning. He told her she should stay in the inn on rainy days like this, or it would make people think he was bullying her. Nail assured him that she would be fine, but Aldis insisted that wasn't how it looked. That was why he came here, but she still didn't budge. So Aldis told her to wait and offered her the use of the towel in his hand. Nali expressed her gratitude for his concern. Then she took off her hood and dried herself with the towel. Nali was truly beautiful. No one could take their eyes off her, not even with a casual glance. Aldis knew that, but he wanted to stand his ground for the girls' sake. Then, Nail said that she wanted him to thank the girls in the house as well. Aldis was quickly on his guard as he asked her how she knew about the girls. Nala replied that he was too naive, but Aldis wanted to know how she could have known they were twins. Nail said she could sense their magical power, from which it was clear they were twins, because they had the same magical shape and color. Aldis was wary again, remembering that he still knew nothing about this woman's identity or purpose. But she didn't seem hostile towards him. He wasn't sure if it was safe to reveal anything about the girls to her, but now that she knew, Aldis asked her about her thoughts on the being known as the goddess. Nala didn't want to answer such abstract questions, but her answer was simple. She didn't care about the way of thinking of someone who didn't even exist. Nal didn't believe the goddess existed, and Aldis never expected that someone in this world would think that way. Nali added that the same could be said for other deities, because there are no gods in heaven or on earth. If there were a god, they would be too far away for a human to care about, as they are beyond their reach. Aldis was amazed by her words. Even though this was a world where the goddess and her messengers intervened, he said that if she were right, then what did the church believe in? She replied that that was something only they would know, as she had no knowledge of people she'd never met. They both knew that the gods hated twins, but out of 100 pregnant women, there would be at least one set of twins. It's a natural phenomenon whether gods exist or not. So hating people just because they're twins is truly foolish. But Nail had assured him that he wouldn't have to worry about her telling anyone about the twins, be it these children or anyone else, anyone who belongs to Aldis. Nail considers it her duty to protect them. Aldis saw no doubt or hesitation in her eyes, and he told her to swear that she would uphold what she had just said. Nale swore to him on her parents' honor and her duty to keep her promise. Aldis didn't understand much of what Nail had said, but he decided to trust her. That day, Aldis gained a mysterious yet powerful ally by his side. Nal introduced herself to the twins and also thanked them for their kindness with the towel they had sent. However, the twins still seemed wary of her, and Nele realized she might have to wait until they got used to her presence. Aldis introduced the twins to Nele and then asked if she had a name. Nale replied that she hadn't had an official name before, and that even Nele wasn't her real name. Aldis was surprised that she didn't have a name and asked who she was. She said he could call her by any name, but that sounded strange. The twins started to think about what they should name Miss Nameless. Aldis also thought that he should come up with a name. And since the name Nele sounded quite nice, he decided to name her Nele from now on. He asked if she was okay with it, and Nele replied that she was perfectly fine with that name. So she greeted them again, saying that she would be in their care from now on. Later, Aldous went to their usual meeting place with Ted's Morning Star group. Norris mentioned that Nele seemed strange, and the fact that her identity was still unclear. Aldous claimed it wasn't a problem for him, since she didn't have any prejudice against twins. And there were many other mercenaries with unknown identities as well. Norris mentioned that Aldous was one of them. But regardless, Ophelia added that having Nele live in his house was still a little unsettling. Aldous knew it wouldn't be an issue, recalling how she had so vehemently denied the goddess's existence. Ted said that if Aldous was okay with it, then it was fine. And besides, he mentioned that more rumors had been popping up. Aldous asked if they were rumors about the Grinder, a monster that lived in the Cannabis Mountain Range. The Grinder was known to be a hybrid of a bull and a horse, with 4 wings and sharp claws. It was said to be stronger than ordinary monsters and thus was feared by many adventurers. When Aldous commented that he never expected the Grinder to come down from the mountains, Norris added that the number of predators around Thoria had recently decreased, which in turn led to an increase in herbivores, making the area a tempting hunting ground for the Grinder. Ted recalled that Aldous had previously said hunting had become more efficient with the help of a powerful woman, and that this might be related to the problem. Aldous asked if he was implying it was his fault, and all 3 of them agreed. Ted explained to Aldous that while monsters are dangerous, he shouldn't be hunting them to the point of extinction. Norris added that you shouldn't mess with the ecosystem, while Ophelia was surprised that her words had actually gotten through to Aldous. Aldous reluctantly apologized for causing them trouble. Ted then brought out a letter of request, stating that the army was forming a subjugation team to deal with the Grinder, and they were so pressed that they had to invite mercenaries to join. Ted wished he could refuse, but since it was a request from Lord Thoria himself, he couldn't. Norris said they'd be thrilled if a certain someone who was rude and antagonistic toward the army would agree to join them. Ophelia rephrased his statement, saying she'd be delighted to have a mysterious boy whose identity, rank, and even monster hunting methods were all unknown. Aldous understood their taunt, so he agreed to help, and after 2 days of preparation, a team was formed to subjugate the Grinder. They left Thoria and headed for the area where the Grinder was expected to appear. The area consisted mostly of flat plains, now filled with soldiers. The troops placed great hope in their captain, who was leading them on this crucial subjugation mission. Captain Deccan was pleased to also have the support of Captain Drews. Deccan was known as the army's finest swordsman, and the soldiers believed there was no way he could lose to the Grinder. In addition to the army, 9 mercenary teams were also taking part in the subjugation. However, Captain Drews wasn't comfortable with the army having to hire mercenaries. Deccan insisted that they didn't need to rely on the mercenaries' strength, and could handle everything with their own military power. Drews wondered if Deccan had gotten over the incident that occurred when he'd been ordered to fight a female mercenary. He'd been told to defeat this female mercenary, who had been arrogant toward Lord Thoria. But when he went to teach her a lesson, Deccan had proudly declared that he would easily defeat her without any serious harm. The woman they were talking about was none other than Nele, who had gone there on Aldous' orders on the very first day. That day, Nele had fought a soldier, who was none other than Captain Deccan, but their match ended the moment Deccan charged at her. His sword was sent flying in front of everyone, including the Lord and General of Thoria. Deccan was shocked to be defeated by a woman who hadn't even moved during the fight. The loss brought great shame to his name, and the fact that Deccan had been defeated in a single blow by a female mercenary became a hot topic of ridicule among all the soldiers. Deccan wanted to redeem himself by achieving something in this subjugation, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, on the mercenaries' side, Ted thought it was insane that the army was creating such ridiculous formations to take down the Grinder. On top of that, Deccan hadn't even called for any mages, despite them facing a flying monster. Norris told the others that the army seemed to be filled with new recruits, nothing but rookies. Aldous, as mentioned, had joined the subjugation, and his attendant Nele also arrived after scouting the area, reporting to her master Aldous that she hadn't seen any monsters, let alone the Grinder, in the vicinity. Norris asked if she was serious about calling Aldous her master, which made her furious. Ted told them it was time for lunch, while Ophelia was the only one unfazed by the sight of Nele flying around. Before they started their lunch in the field under the fine weather, Ted mentioned that beast kings often appeared in these parts. Nolly then chimed in that she and Aldous had hunted about 50 beasts recently. Aldous gestured for her to be quiet, but Ted didn't find that unusual. He asked Nayli if she wanted to join their party, seeing as she was so talented. Nayli replied that if Aldous chose to go with them, she would follow. Ted started to relax a bit, since sitting around like this wasn't half bad and they rarely got a break from work. Ophelia remarked on how nice the weather was, while Ted was feeling content with the gentle breeze and the shadow of a bird in the sky. But suddenly he realized that the shadow wasn't from a bird, but from something enormous. It wasn't some monstrous bird or anything of the sort. Nall immediately told them that it was the grinder. Ted immediately told Norris to send up a smoke signal, and the grinder seemed to be heading in a different direction, toward where the main forces were stationed. Aldous and Nail decided to give chase. Both of them rushed towards the grinder, trying to minimize casualties. But when they arrived, Aldous' worst fears were realized. The grinder stood over the bodies of fallen soldiers. The survivors were wounded and screaming for help, but the grinder was about to attack them. A warrior threw a knife at the grinder, but it only caused a minor wound. Meanwhile, Aldous prepared a magical attack, performing a mock incantation, so the soldiers wouldn't notice. He launched a fire spell at the grinder, but it dodged by soaring into the air. The grinder suddenly unleashed a magical attack of its own, but Nail managed to block it just in time with his shield. Aldous knew he couldn't use his sword magic in front of the soldiers, and the grinder started to fly away, heading towards the rest of the army. When Captain Druce stopped Aldous and demanded he use magic to heal the wounded, Aldous refused, saying he didn't have healing abilities. Druce insisted he provide medicine or anything else, anything but let them leave, as he didn't think Aldous could catch a flying target. Aldous knew it was possible for him, but he couldn't do it with so many people around. Meanwhile, smoke signals began to rise from where the other squads were gathered. Captain Decken warned the other soldiers, thinking that 30 men together would have no problem, and he was eager to be the one to defeat the grinder, no matter what. Then, a soldier reported the silhouette of something flying towards them. It was the ferocious grinder, and Decken was thrilled to see it had finally arrived. He ordered everyone to get ready, but before he could finish his command, the grinder had already moved, killing several soldiers in the blink of an eye with its unstoppable claws. Decken realized what a serious threat they were up against. When the grinder flew up to prepare for another dive, Decken couldn't keep up with its speed. The grinder dove down like a nightmare, larger than anything Decken had ever experienced. He tried not to let himself falter, as this was his only chance to atone for his mistakes. If he ran now, it would haunt him with regret for the rest of his life. Decken ordered his men to hold their ground and aim for the grinder's claw, the one that was already injured, not by soldiers, but by Nayli. The soldiers attacked just as commanded, but in the blink of an eye, everyone who charged forward was annihilated. Decken watched them die one by one as the grinder impaled them, tearing their bodies apart as if they were nothing but food. Decken realized he was powerless against this monster, and if they didn't retreat now, even more of his men would be slaughtered. Decken doubted if they could even wound it. Another squad of soldiers rushed down from higher ground and blindly charged the grinder. Decken tried to stop them, but it was useless, because the grinder used a powerful move called Wind Shear to cut down all the soldiers in its path in a single sweep. The soldiers' blood sprayed everywhere, and Decken felt helpless before this terrifying monster. Almost all the troops he had led were dead, and the grinder began to advance on Decken. Decken trembled even more as the monster drew closer. Then an arrow shot through the air and struck the grinder's beak. Ted's Morning Star squad had arrived just in time to confront the grinder. Fearlessly, Ted charged forward, swinging his sword and aiming for the monster's neck, but he couldn't get close because of the grinder's wind magic. Ophelia began to cast a magic spell to restrict the grinder's movements. However, the monster easily destroyed all the ice she created, and all their efforts seemed to be in vain, but they couldn't give up. Norris kept firing his bow, while Ted attacked relentlessly with his sword. They were barely holding the monster at bay, while Decken was in complete despair. He saw that these mercenaries were highly skilled and well-coordinated, so they might have a chance against the grinder. But at the same time, when Ted's shield shattered, he was left with only his sword to fight. The grinder was no longer having a hard time dealing with them, and Decken understood that they were in danger. Norris shouted, asking where Aldous was when they needed him most. As the grinder prepared a powerful magic wind attack, Decken knew exactly how dangerous it was, so he yelled for everyone to run. Suddenly, one of the grinder's wings was sliced off, and as the wing fell, Decken realized the slash came from the mercenary Aldous. He had finally joined the fight against the grinder. This time, Aldous had no intention of holding back like before. He landed beside Ted's group, while the grinder shrieked in pain from the loss of its wing. Nale joined the battle as well, throwing her daggers into the grinder's left leg to make sure it couldn't run away like before. Aldous and Nail wanted to end this once and for all, and immediately Aldous sliced off the monster's head, bringing the hunt to a close. Decken never expected that they would survive this battle. Hearing the voice of a soldier behind him, he quickly asked the soldier if he was all right. But it was no use, as Decken was the reason all the soldiers had charged in to attack without a plan. His reinforcements had been wiped out, and Decken was the only survivor from his unit. It was all over for Decken, and he knew his life would become a nightmare from this point on. He heard Nail talking to Aldous, asking if they should take just the grinder's head or the whole body. Aldous replied that the body was worthless, so they should just leave it. Decken looked at the two of them and realized that Naili was the woman who had started all his misfortunes. If she hadn't been there, he thought, everything would have been better. They both noticed Decken staring at her, and she stared right back at him, daring him to have any ideas about going against her. Meanwhile, Decken couldn't help but hate her even more. Afterward, for the successful subjugation of the grinder, Lord Thariah and his army were praised for their efforts. According to the reports, it was the army that took care of the grinder, and Aldous didn't mind that at all. He just wanted to keep his life peaceful rather than deal with any hassles, and he was happy to have received his reward. Thus, the truth that the army had been useless in the fight, and that it was Aldous and the mercenaries who had fought the grinder, was kept hidden from the public. Now, at Lord Thoria's residence, the Marquis was sitting on his throne with Costas and Decken beside him in the court. The government minister asked Decken if he knew why he had been summoned here, which he himself knew full well. Costas told Decken that even when given a chance to redeem his honor, he still lost his men, and in the end, it was that female mercenary who took all the credit. Decken pleaded with them for a favor, while the government minister declared that it didn't matter what his swordsmanship skills were like if he couldn't achieve anything for them. The Lord told Costas that they shouldn't discuss the matter any further, as anyone can make a mistake or two. He said he believed Decken would become stronger after this incident, and Decken nodded in agreement. The Lord Marquis reminded Decken that if he thought this female mercenary was truly strong, then it was a frightening thing for someone so powerful to be wandering around unrestrained. He feared that one day she might disrupt their order, and what was more dangerous was that the female mercenary had no interest in or respect for the Lord Marquis whatsoever. The Marquis had deemed her a threat without any real justification, and Decken muttered his assent to his words. Furthermore, the Marquis knew this woman had an ally, a boorish warrior who had rejected a personal request from the general in the past, which he found troublesome. Therefore, he thought of something and stared intently at Decken. Decken quickly requested that they allow him to handle the issue. The general told Decken to focus on completing his current mission, or he could take time off from his official duties to act freely. Costas also said that he could train during that period, and they would assign him 6 soldiers under his command. The Marquis told him that he had the right to use them as he wished, and that this was his last chance to advance in rank, or he would remain nothing but a captain. Afterwards, Decken left the court, and the surrounding soldiers jeered at him. Decken was terrified that this mockery would stick with him for the rest of his life. While the Marquis asked Costas whether it was necessary to send an entire squad to deal with a single mercenary, Costas replied that sending more would be too unusual and would arouse suspicion, so he hoped sending Decken would compensate for their lack of military strength. He remembered that the fortress he had sent Decken to was currently vacant and could be used for training purposes. Costas's plan was to actually use Decken to deal with Aldous and Nilo, and if he failed, they would deny any connection between Decken and Lord Marquis. So it was best for Decken to get a positive result, or he could be in deep trouble. Meanwhile, at Aldous's house, Philia and Rihanna were playing house together. They played with dolls representing a father, a mother, and 2 cute twin girls. Aldous watched the girls play peacefully, wishing everything could stay like this forever. But Aldous wasn't sure how much longer he could protect them. In the past, he had considered sending each of them to a different place to learn a trade, but neither of them wanted to be apart. They also didn't like wearing different clothes. In their little game, they still maintained their identical appearance, and Aldous realized he couldn't imagine letting the two of them leave his side. He realized he had grown softer, and the reason he was thinking this way was because the situation had changed so much from before. Lately, whenever Aldous went into town, he felt the atmosphere around him had changed. In the shop he usually visited to buy groceries, the saleswoman seemed uncomfortable as she handed him his things. Then, when he went to get medicine, the shopkeeper told Aldous not to come back to the store anymore. Aldous was certain that something had happened with the townspeople. As he was leaving the shop, the innkeeper, who had previously let him stay with the girls, called out to him from behind. Aldous remembered her, and she informed him that the girl's existence had been exposed to the public. Not only that, but the innkeeper also said that she normally doesn't reveal her customers' secrets. But when the soldiers came to her inn, she had to tell them about him, because she would get in trouble if she lied. Besides, the soldiers had also been asking other customers, so it wasn't as if she could have kept his secret anyway. Aldous thanked her for letting him know about the situation. He pondered the reason behind the strange behavior of everyone around him. He wondered why the army was suddenly investigating him, and the only possible reason was that they had lost face somehow. Once he understood the reason, he decided to talk to Ted and the others about it. Norris said the obvious reason was Nail, because after she went to the Lord's castle, Nail had caused a huge mess for the Lord and the others, while also showing them disrespect in front of everyone. Aldous wished she hadn't done that. Meanwhile, Norris argued that Aldous was also to blame, since he had taken the credit for killing the grinder monster and the reward. It was obvious the army would keep an eye on them. After so many things had piled up, Norris reasoned that the army must have found out about the twin girls after checking Aldous's background. Therefore, the situation was no longer just about being watched, but the general, the lord, and the head of the battalion had all begun to move against Aldous. This combination had made him an enemy of the entire nation, so now Aldous had to come up with a plan to deal with it all. Now, back in the present, Aldous sighed at home, thinking that perhaps he needed to leave Thoria for good. Then Nale came and asked him what was wrong, but Aldous was more surprised to see that Nale could do everything, from cooking and cleaning to preparing his tea. She was really like a maid, except her behavior was more like a wife's. Getting back to the serious matter at hand, Aldous informed Nale that the army had begun to make its move against them. She suggested wiping them all off the face of the earth. Aldous told her not to do that, as it would mean the entire nation would become their enemy. Aldous tried to think of other solutions, like whether they should just lay low for a while and let things cool down. But it was still dangerous since the Lord of Thoria was involved in this incident. Aldous remembered that Nale had met the Lord before, so he asked her what kind of person he was. She replied that the Marku was a vile, greedy man with no virtues whatsoever. Aldous hadn't expected the Lord himself to be so corrupt, and that he had actually told Nail to be his plaything, staying by his side at all times. Aldous asked about the general, and she replied that he was a mongrel who only knew how to bark orders, no different from a stray dog. Aldous understood completely. She was right about the general. Thinking about a solution, he told Nail to be ready to leave Thoria at a moment's notice. That night, Philia asked Aldous about the strange, wall-like thing outside. He answered that it was a barrier to keep hostile people away, and that it wouldn't draw attention from the outside when he left. While Naley was taking care of the shopping, Aldous had fallen asleep after overthinking everything. The twin sisters noticed he'd been sleeping a lot lately and felt a little worried, so they decided to go out and head towards town, hoping that Aldous wouldn't be angry if he found out they'd left the house. Philia wondered if the old man they had met before was still there, and thought they might be able to get some snacks. In the end, the sisters were still just kids, so they couldn't contain their excitement until Philia stopped because someone was standing in front of them. It was clearly a person in black armor with malicious intent. After a while, Aldous realized the twins weren't home, which could only mean they had gone out. He felt terrible for not predicting this would happen, so he told Nail to watch the house while he went to look for the sisters. Nail handed him a letter she had found at the front gate, and it was addressed to a female mercenary, which meant it was for Nele. Aldous was shocked when he read the letter's contents, which stated it was a summons for them to come to the northern fortress if they wanted to see the twins again. Aldous' anger completely erupted this time, as he felt it was enough that people just wanted to hate and hunt down the twins. Nolly apologized that her situation had dragged the sisters into this, but he replied that it wasn't her fault, but his for being too naive. Aldous felt he should have known that he couldn't hide the twins' existence forever, and the time he thought he had to plan for it was over, because he knew just how disgusting those people were. Nail asked him to give her an order, while Aldous knew he had no time to consult or discuss things with Norris or the others. He had also left the goddess worshippers and their crazy beliefs alone. But now, if it was a fight those bastards wanted, Aldous was ready to make them pay, just as they had asked for by kidnapping the twins. Aldous refused to break the promise he made to himself to protect the twins, and now he wanted to make sure he burned this warning into his enemies' minds. As it turned out, the one who had kidnapped the twins was Deccan, who had a secret plan in mind to win the upcoming battle he knew was coming. Deccan went down to the basement in his house, and after descending the stairs, he saw a storage room where many precious items and other equipment were kept. Deccan had come here specifically to retrieve a sword that belonged to his ancestors, who had also been soldiers. Long ago he had heard from his elders that his ancestor had participated in a defensive battle that everyone thought would end in failure. But in the end, Deccan's ancestor had won, which led to him being promoted to general. Deccan was taught as a child that he should never use this sword unless he was backed into a corner as a last resort. Deccan thought that now was the perfect time to use this sword, so he took it in the hopes of defeating Nele. However, the power that came with this sword had a price. He also knew that the two captured children might be useful here, so he brought 5 rings along with the sword and headed for the fortress. The fortress was packed with hundreds of soldiers stationed everywhere, all of them briefed and ready for battle. Aldous and Nale had also arrived at the fortress, and Nale asked him what their plan was. She thought he might suggest negotiating, but this time he had no intention of forgiving them at all, not even if they begged. Aldous wanted to show them what it truly meant to pick a fight with him. Aldous created a large rock, and while he was doing so, one of the soldiers in the watchtower recognized him. The soldiers were stunned to see Aldous and Nale had actually come alone, which made them think the two were looking down on their army. The soldiers saw this as a humiliation, so they told each other to get into position and not let their guard down just because it was only 2 people. They didn't think these two would be as strong as rumored, so they figured they could just watch the final moments of these mercenaries. The soldiers ordered the gates to be opened, but before anyone could even take a step, the entire wall, including the gate, came crashing down from an explosion. As the dust settled, the soldiers stood frozen as they saw giant boulders flying toward them, crushing the walls. But it wasn't just the wall that was crushed, as Aldous and Nale had arrived right after, destroying all the soldiers' formations. Aldous walked into the fortress, his eyes filled with fury, and the soldiers still thought they had a chance, even after witnessing such a spectacle. Nale immediately recognized Deccan as she knew who he was, and Deccan, in turn, warned Nale and Aldous that they wouldn't be getting out of there alive. Aldous asked Nale if Deccan was the person she'd mentioned earlier, and she confirmed that he was. Deccan stood there with a smirk on his face, seeing that Aldous and Nale weren't running away. Before Deccan could say another word, a sword thrown by Aldous lightly grazed his neck, causing him to panic and scream about what the hell Aldous had just done. Aldous said that was just the beginning, as he had no intention of letting the ones who touched the twins get away with a mere scratch. Deccan screamed that he was the one in charge here, and ordered all the archers to fire at Aldous, with none of them allowed to miss. The archers obeyed, and Deccan declared this would be the last time he'd have to look at Nale's unpleasant face. Aldous and Nale paid no mind to the arrows flying toward them. Because it was a simple task for Nale to make all the arrows swirl around her, while Aldous used his magic to counterattack by twisting metal blades formed from his magic. The metal shards flew straight into the wall, leaving a massive crack, causing the entire wall to tremble and collapse. A quarter of the soldiers on the wall tried to escape to no avail, and just like that, a quarter of the army was eliminated. Deccan couldn't believe Aldous' power was so immense. Aldous told him that was just a section of the wall, and that the entire fortress would be next. Soon, he said, everyone here would find themselves buried in rubble. Aldous demanded they return the twins, but Deccan refused to admit defeat in any way, so he ordered the mages to attack Aldous. Their combined spells were certainly more powerful than any ordinary attack, but for Nale and Aldous, it was a simple matter to block them with their magic barriers. Nale told them it was useless, while Deccan couldn't stand the sight of Nale remaining unharmed. He told his soldiers they were fighting a woman, who was just a mage at best. So he sent the melee soldiers into the fray. Before Nale could cast an offensive spell, the melee troops charged toward Aldous and Nale, but they had no idea that Aldous and Nale were actually exceptional at close-quarters combat. In fact, it was their specialty. Aldous told Nale that he wouldn't be holding back this time, and then warned the soldiers to only come at him if they no longer wished to live. Aldous used his sword magic to sever the arms of those who came at him with swords, and as for those with spears, Aldous dodged their thrusts and cut off their legs without a hint of mercy. Aldous continued his brutal rampage, killing one soldier after another while Nale did the same on her end. The soldiers started thinking that taking these two down would be a great achievement, a perfect opportunity for a promotion. Aldous noticed the soldiers rushing him were driven by greed for promotion, and he gave them a deathly glare. He made it clear they deserved no mercy. Aldous beheaded the soldiers, making a gruesome example out of them for the others, so that they wouldn't dare to attack. By this point, Aldous and Nale had killed so many soldiers that no one dared to charge in and throw their lives away. Deccan could not only see the fear in the eyes of the soldiers around him, but he also felt that same terror in his own heart. As Aldous stepped forward, he leaped straight over Decken. Decken realized that Aldous was the one with true power. As Aldous landed behind him, he proved his strength, making Decken's advantage in numbers completely meaningless. Aldous stood before Decken, sword magic swirling around his blade, and asked if he'd rather he destroy the very ground beneath their feet, or if he would return the twins. Decken desperately shouted that he wasn't afraid of threats from some guy who had defied the army. He saw Aldous and Nail as criminals and said they had no place left in Thoria. Aldous told him that Decken was the real criminal, and that it was unbelievable to hear such words from the one who kidnapped innocent children. Decken replied that the children he kidnapped were not innocent, as everyone knew that the existence of twins was an impurity in itself and a sin declared by the goddess. Aldous argued that all this nonsense should end. Just because someone is born a twin doesn't mean they are a sinner. Aldous yelled, asking who this goddess was to decide the fate of others. He rejected it and everyone who believed in the goddess's words. He wondered how many twins had lived miserable lives until now just because of this goddess. If he couldn't save all the children in this world, Aldous was determined to save the ones right in front of him. He considered all followers of the goddess his enemy and declared war on all of them, whether it was the army or some lord. Decken called him a lowly mercenary, daring him to come at him. Aldous and Decken clashed swords, but Aldous felt something was wrong. Aldous was pushed back by Decken's block, which surprised him slightly since his own sword was enchanted with magic, and it should have cut through Decken's sword. The only explanation was that Decken's sword was also enchanted with magic. Decken warned Aldous that he would now experience the power of the demon sword, passed down from his ancestors along with his very body. Aldous tried to gauge Decken's movements in battle, and it seemed Decken's physical abilities had improved as well. However, Aldous didn't feel anything different, except when Decken attacked. Aldous began to strategize while throwing out a few feints. Decken blocked them with his sword, telling Aldous that his sword magic was just that. Magic, so it wouldn't do much against true power. Aldous quickly leapt backward, and decided to try a different approach, creating sharp stones with his magic and launching them at Decken. Decken quickly held his sword straight and it began to absorb all the stones, or more accurately, the sword absorbed Aldous's magic. Now, Decken made his move, swinging his sword with magical power. Upon impact with Aldous's sword, Aldous noticed his own magic was also being absorbed by the longsword. He quickly retreated to break contact. Decken didn't want to give Aldous any time to rest, so he launched a long-range magical slash from his sword. Aldous used a magic shield to block it, but to his surprise, his shield was shattered by the blow, and the attack grazed past his side. Aldous felt a slight cut, then saw his own blood dripping from his cheek. He now had a clear idea of how Decken's sword absorbed magical attacks and magic from weapons, then converted it into offensive power to use in return. Aldous noticed Decken's sword was no longer glowing, which made him think its magic might have been depleted. So he decided to continue the fight, but this time without using any magic, relying only on pure swordsmanship to defeat Decken. Decken laughed as if it were a joke to think he could be defeated in swordsmanship. Aldous reminded him that he was never a mage to begin with. The two clashed again, their blades ringing out loudly. And as the sword fight continued, Aldous tried to find a good opening. But Decken was still able to keep up with his moves and tactics. But then, Aldous used his speed to his advantage to create a wound on Decken, but Decken blocked it with the flat of his blade. Aldous was surprised to find himself pushed back again. He had been avoiding enchanting his sword so far, because if he fought with magic, his own sword would be quickly broken. Aldous decided to focus everything he had on overwhelming Decken with his speed, and unleashed a series of consecutive slashes just a split second apart. Decken struggled to hold his ground and was finally pushed back despite blocking all of Aldous's attacks. As he was pushed into a corner, Decken grew desperate, so he unleashed the power of his sword, which he had been holding as his trump card. Aldous was astonished and wondered where Decken was getting this magical power from. Decken wasted no time attacking Aldous with the sword's magical power, and since it was a direct hit, Aldous had to use multiple barriers to protect himself. Decken yelled at Aldous that he should keep wondering about the source of his power while he finished him off. Just then, Nail appeared from behind Decken and launched a surprise attack on his back. But before Decken could even realize it, his longsword had absorbed Nail's attack. Nale couldn't believe this was happening, while Decken remembered that she was his main target, so he had to finish her off first. He attacked Nail with the same move as before, and she couldn't understand how he had gotten so much stronger. Aldous tried to approach Decken from his blind spot, but Decken noticed and redirected his attack at Aldous. Aldous dodged the attack, but he knew this amount of magical energy definitely wasn't coming from Decken himself. Then he heard someone scream, and one of the mages from Decken's army was in agony as his magical power was being drained too quickly. The man looked miserable, and Aldous had never seen anyone in such a state. He noticed a ring on the suffering mage's hand, and putting the pieces together, Aldous realized the sword was actually drawing magical power from the mage through that draining ring. The other mages questioned Decken about this, since all they were told was that the rings would amplify their magical power. Decken told them to shut up and make themselves useful this way. At least he believed a few sacrifices would be a great asset in defeating these rebels. The mage refused, screaming that he wasn't some disposable object. Meanwhile, Decken pushed the magical output to its maximum, causing even the other mages wearing the rings to suffer excruciating pain from head to toe. Nayla could see how cruelly Decken was using his own allies. Decken retorted that if she didn't like it, she was free to die, since she would fall into his hands sooner or later. Nayla shot back that nothing he was imagining would ever happen. Decken scoffed and asked if she was so sure about that. They all knew he was secretly planning something. That's when Decken explained the ring's purpose, revealing he had 5 in total. He had placed limiters on 3 of the rings since they belonged to the soldiers, while the remaining 2 had no limits. Aldous and Nayli understood what Decken was implying about those 2 rings, because Decken himself admitted that those 2 were placed on the fingers of twin children. So right at this moment, they were fighting for their lives against the constant drain of their magic. This made it impossible for them to just sit still and cry. They wished Aldous would come and save them from this agony. Decken warned Aldous that the more he resisted, the more magical power would be drained from the twins. If he truly cared about their lives, he should give up and let himself be killed by him as soon as possible. Nodley called Decken a filthy bastard, while Aldous couldn't stand how rotten the guy was. Decken unleashed even more magical power in his next attack, but Aldous knew he had to stay calm and think of a way out of this situation. He knew that one wrong move here would only put the twins in more danger. Nail then asked if they should make a temporary retreat. Aldous said he was sure these guys wouldn't let the twins live if he retreated, so fighting that scumbag Decken right now was their only option. Decken showed no sign of stopping the flow of magical power, but suddenly the sword's magic stopped on its own. Aldous figured that the flow of magical energy had been cut off, while Decken quickly looked at the mages who had taken the rings off their fingers. Decken demanded to know who gave them permission to remove the rings, but it was clear the mages had done it of their own free will. Decken snarled that they would regret this later, but for now, he had to deal with Aldous and Nyle. Just then, Nyle pointed out that Decken didn't even have the trust of his own subordinates. Decken didn't care that he had lost just those 3 idiots. Nali informed Aldous that the longsword's effectiveness decreases when the source of its magic is too far away, which meant the twins had to be somewhere inside the fortress. She decided she would distract Decken while Aldous went to save the twins. But Aldous knew he should be the one to distract Decken, since he ultimately had a much larger magic supply than she did. Aldous created a massive amount of sharp rocks in the air, and fired them all at Decken at once. Decken rendered Aldous's attack useless, as his sword simply absorbed all the magic projectiles. Nali realized that Aldous was actually trying to overload the longsword with magic, so that it wouldn't need any more supply from the twins. She quickly went to find and rescue the twins inside the fortress. Decken didn't want to let her escape, so Aldous threw more rocks to block his path. Aldous told Decken to keep his focus on his real opponent, him. Meanwhile, from the prison cells, the twins' painful cries echoed everywhere. They were just children, and seeing them suffer so much made even the soldiers guarding them feel uneasy. They didn't like that the twins had to suffer just because they were despised children. One soldier's heart ached, thinking that these children were the same age as his own little daughter. But since they were branded as sinners, the soldiers had to do their duty. Another soldier asked what they were really doing there, locking up young and innocent children in a cell. The first soldier had nothing to say, because he knew that no matter how they felt, their superiors wouldn't forgive them if they disobeyed orders. Suddenly, the sounds from the twins stopped, startling the soldier. He quickly turned to check on them, and he saw that the twins were on the verge of death, their eyes having streamed with tears for hours. The soldier couldn't help but pity the poor children, who were begging him for help. Immediately, the second soldier called out to him, saying they should start taking turns, starting with the first soldier taking a rest. He insisted it would be fine, since everyone needed a break during their shift for the restroom and other things, so he asked the first soldier to give him the keys and go take his break. The first soldier understood his intention, so he told the second soldier to take a break instead. He said he knew what the other man was trying to do here, which was to free the children and take all the blame. Therefore, the first soldier insisted that he would take full responsibility. However, the second soldier said he couldn't let the first one be the only good guy here, since this was their idea together. In any case, the soldiers wanted to end the twins' suffering. They noticed that the rings on the girls' thumbs looked suspicious, and that was probably what was causing their pain. Meanwhile, Decken continued to launch magical attacks from his longsword, while Aldous struggled to defend himself and channel his own magical power into his sword. This was incredibly difficult for him, but he had no other choice. Decken laughed loudly, savoring the moment as he watched those responsible for his humiliation suffer right before his eyes. Realizing Aldous was trying to save the children by channeling his magical energy, he told him it was a foolish idea from the start. Decken asked Aldous if those children were really that important to him. Aldous retorted by asking if Decken's nonsense about the goddess was important to him. He asked what sins those two children could have possibly committed to be treated this way, but Decken only focused on how Aldous dared to call the goddess meaningless. Decken believed everything the goddess said. Aldous replied that blindly believing someone's words like that was pathetic. Aldous said that he had no right to call the children filthy when he was the filthy one, a man with no pride. Decken felt insulted by the taunts about his pride. Aldous had provoked him, and now Decken was willing to sacrifice everything just to make Aldous regret his actions by killing the children. Decken decided to unleash all the magic the sword could muster at once. He aimed to drain every last drop of the children's magical power. Aldous knew this would be the killing blow for his sisters, and he had to stop it. But Decken had already set the sword's magical limit on the children to finish them off. Decken taunted that it was futile, despite Aldous' efforts to distract him. Aldous tried to tell Decken to stop, but it was useless, as Decken clearly wasn't one to listen to anyone but himself. He unleashed the longsword's full power, and to Aldous' surprise, the sword began absorbing magic from Decken instead. Decken began to suffer the same terrible pain he had inflicted on 5 others, as the sword was now draining only his power. He wondered why this was happening, since the rings were supposed to be doing their job. Aldous was grateful for this miracle, and though he didn't understand what was happening, he seized the opportunity to kill Decken by piercing his heart, ending the fight instantly. Decken couldn't react to Aldous' attack this time, and so he coughed up a massive amount of blood and died. Decken's body lay motionless on the ground, and Aldous thought that he could finally go save Philia and Rihanna. He turned to look for them, hoping they were safe. Just then, Decken's longsword began to glow brilliantly. Aldous saw the sword's magical power was about to explode. In the next moment, the entire castle began to detonate from the released energy. A few moments earlier, the soldiers guarding Philia and Rihanna were confused about what to do with the rings. They figured they would report later that the rings had fallen off after the children collapsed, but removing the handcuffs would surely get them in trouble. Just then, the impact of the explosion began to shake the prison ceiling, and they realized they had to get out of there immediately. So the soldiers tried to remove the girls' handcuffs, but they were out of time as the prison walls began to crumble. The soldiers decided to protect the girls with their own bodies instead of running away, and just like that, the fortress continued to collapse for several minutes. Afterward, the survivors quickly moved the injured to a safe place, while Aldous had survived the impact thanks to his magic shield. He hadn't expected the explosion to be so massive, so he rushed to check on Nele and his younger sisters. When he reached the basement detention area, Aldous called out everyone's names and heard Nele reply, reporting that the girls seemed to be safe. He felt grateful they were safe. Then, Nele added that when she got there, the girls had been buried under the rubble along with 2 soldiers who had apparently protected them with their own bodies. She wasn't entirely sure if the soldiers were actually protecting them or had some other purpose, but their suspicions were cleared up when they saw that the rings had been removed from the girls' fingers. Aldous pieced it all together and respected the soldiers for their sacrifice. Afterward, Nele asked Aldous what his plan was, and he replied that they would leave town immediately, as the army would surely be after them again. He figured they should head for the royal capital, Gran, which was much larger than Thoria and also better for gathering information. Aldous still hoped to find a clue about his comrades there, and he asked Nele if she wanted to come with him. Nele confessed that her very life was sworn to him. Hearing that, Aldous felt incredibly grateful to have Nale by his side to help him through this situation. After all, he had once thought he could manage everything himself without anyone else getting involved. But now, after this incident and seeing the look on Philia's face, Aldous understood that having Nele with him was crucial for ensuring the twins' safety. He smiled and told her to keep following him, feeling the warmth of the lives he now had to protect. Later, they reached the Casas forest, where Nele stood motionless on a lake's surface as a mysterious enemy lurking in the water attacked her. Aldous watched her fight as Nele seemed to have been captured by the monster. He told the worried twins that there was no need to panic, and that she would be back soon after finishing the battle. They had arrived in the Casas forest some time ago, and were on their way to the royal capital from Thoria on foot. The twins asked him if they weren't going to the capital, and he replied that he was waiting to see how the incident in Thoria would be reported. He mentioned that they might even be forced to leave the country, which wouldn't be surprising after what they had done. Aldous wished he'd had at least a little time to explain things to Ted and the others, but regardless, he had thought of a good place for them to stay temporarily. He noticed that the twins were still frightened after the incident, and were clinging to him tightly. Aldous reassured them not to worry because he wouldn't let something like that happen again. He asked them to never sneak out again without telling him. Then he used magic to chop down the trees around them, making the area much more spacious and brighter than before. Now, he asked Nele to take care of any dangerous monsters nearby, while also making sure to hunt some animals for their meal. Nala went out as requested, and Aldous told the twins he was going to build a house. The twins were excited to see how he would do it, and Aldous started by creating the foundation for the house. Aldous uprooted the trees in a certain area and then used his earth magic to build a flat foundation. After that, he processed the wood he had cut down to quickly build a house. However, at that very moment, a monster appeared from behind the bushes, and just as it was about to attack Aldous, a sword pierced the monster, killing it instantly, while ensuring that the construction of the house was not interrupted. The twins watched the process with curiosity and joy, and before long, the house was finished. However, it looked more like a warehouse than a house, and Aldous thought he should improve its shape a bit. At the same time, Nele returned from her hunt, carrying the animals Aldous had asked for. She reported to Aldous that there weren't many dangerous monsters, so they could start preparing their meal. Aldous liked the sound of that, but then he heard a sound coming from the lake behind them. There were bubbles rising from the water's surface, and Nele also sensed a faint magical presence from something below. A monster with thick tree roots for limbs quickly emerged from the water, terrifying the twins. As the monster targeted the bears Nele had hunted, and it dragged them into the water with it. Aldous noted that the monster looked large based on its shadow. Nala noticed that Aldous was busy with the twins, so she decided to take on the monster herself. And so she dove into the fight without a hint of fear. Everyone could see that the monster was making a racket and looked absolutely disgusting. So without a moment's hesitation, she used ice magic to freeze its roots, binding and shattering them. The monster roared in agony as it felt the pain from its destroyed limbs. Nele wanted to end this quickly, so to counter the monster's incoming attacks, she blocked them with her defensive magic. At the same time, she aimed for the monster's core. However, the monster moved its limbs in a way that made it difficult for Nele to strike. She realized this creature seemed to have some intelligence. Nal thought about how to finish it fast, and since her light magic wouldn't be effective while she was in the water, she still needed to find a way to destroy the monster quickly. Nele decided she first had to get the monster out of the lake, and so she fired her light magic not at the monster but at the ground beside it. The monster was blasted away by the force of her attack and was soon out of its watery domain. Nale seized the perfect opportunity to attack, freezing the monster, and simultaneously using heat magic to boil it from below. Everyone saw the monster rise from the lake's surface, and moments later it was impaled by multiple beams of light magic that could only have come from Nale. The monster was completely obliterated, its blood splattering across the surface of the lake. Soon after, Nale emerged from the lake, drenched in the red water. She informed Aldous that the water was now unusable, but since he had already built a house, they couldn't leave. Aldous decided they would create water using their magic, and he reminded Nala that as reliable as she was, protecting the twins had to be the top priority. Aldous insisted that from now on he would handle all the fighting. Nele obeyed his command, as always, and it was then that Aldous felt he should ask her more about herself. What were her goals, or at least, why did she choose to serve him? He knew that he hadn't told her about himself either. Nal then replied that the reason she serves him is the same as the reason the sun and moon exist. She believes it to be a natural state of being. Aldous had hoped for a more straightforward answer, but Nele said that she had already answered his question. If he wasn't satisfied with it, then he should be more specific with his question. There was something Aldous had been wanting to ask her for a while, so he asked if she chose to serve him because she knew something about him. Nal replied that all she knew of him was the power she had witnessed firsthand, and nothing more. Aldous figured that if that were true, it would only be natural for her to be at least a little curious about him. Aldous asked if she was okay serving someone she knew nothing about. Nale replied that her duty was to seek out the strongest lord to serve, and to make her decision based on that. Everything else was trivial to her. Having said her piece, she returned to her watch. Meanwhile, Philia asked Aldous if they could go to bed, as it was getting late. Aldous stayed with the girls, his gaze falling on Nile, who was ever devoted to her duty. Aldous knew that he could trust Nail's word, and he also got the sense that she was a native of this world unlike him. And yet, her power was nearly on par with his. The difference was, she was born here, while Aldous came from another world. An outsider. Aldous thought that he probably wouldn't get any answers about his own situation, which meant he was still at square one. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, some sort of viscous liquid was stuck to the trees in several places, near a structure that had clearly been there for centuries. After that, they were able to spend a few peaceful days, and Aldous felt that enough time had passed. He got ready and told the girls that he was going out for a bit and would be back as soon as he could. The girls agreed, and then Aldous told Nayli he was leaving the house and the girls in her care. She accepted the order. The twin girls waved goodbye to Aldous. After Aldous left, Philia and Rihanna decided to play in the yard, and they asked Nellie if she wanted to play with them. Nal had never played with children before, but she agreed to join them and asked what they would play. Meanwhile, Aldous headed for Gran, the capital of the Nagris Kingdom. It was also the kingdom's largest city, with a population of up to 300,000 people. The city had grown since ancient times through trade, and now it was a place where people, products, and all sorts of things could be found, allowing the kingdom to thrive on its own. At one of the city's eateries, a young information broker named Cesare was busy serving clients. Another client came to see him, this time to thank him for the quality of his information. Then, Aldous approached Cesare, asking if he was the information broker, and Cesare confirmed that he was. Aldous sat down without introducing himself to Cesare, which made him wonder. Aldous replied that it wasn't necessary, and then asked Cesare how much he would have to pay for some information. Cesare seemed very enthusiastic as he asked Aldous what information he was looking for. Aldous replied that he wanted to know about the woman who often appeared on the road from Thoria. Cesare tried to analyze Aldous, as this wasn't a topic just anyone would ask about. He guessed Aldous was about 14 or 15 years old and might be a new mercenary trying to make a name for himself, but he also seemed to have some experience. Cesare said the information would cost 5 copper coins, which was quite cheap since there hadn't been any incidents for a while. Aldous gave him 5 copper coins, and Cesare reported that the girl would often appear on that road and challenge mercenaries with just a single knife, but always won. Her age was said to be around 18, and both her identity and purpose were unclear. Cesare added that the girl had stopped appearing for some time now, and from the disappointed look on Aldous' face, he thought Aldous felt dejected. However, Aldous asked if Cesare could track her down. Cesare stopped him and said that any additional information would cost more money, specifically 5 silver coins. Without hesitation, Aldous gave him 5 silver coins, an act that made Cesare a little suspicious. Cesare asked Aldous if he knew about the grinder incident in Thoria, and Aldous nodded to show that he did. Cesare then said that the girl was believed to have participated in that grinder subjugation and had achieved remarkable results. Cesare stated that other information brokers didn't know about this yet, and that she had disappeared about 5 days ago. He asked Aldous if he had any idea where she might have gone, but Cesare confessed that he didn't know either. All Cesare knew beyond this was that there had recently been a large number of casualties at the northern fortress of Thoria. According to the rumors he'd heard, this woman seemed to be involved in that incident as well. Not only that, but Cesare also held back the information that the woman was said to be traveling with a black-haired man. Suddenly, Cesare realized that Aldous fit that description perfectly, and the change in Aldous' expression made him ask if something was wrong. Cesare said it was nothing, but that he was just thinking if there was anything else he could share, since he had received 5 silver coins. Aldous stood up and told Cesare that he would be waiting here tomorrow before the afternoon. Then Aldous went upstairs, apparently having signed in to stay for the day. Cesare was curious about Aldous, so he asked the innkeeper if that person was staying today, and the innkeeper confirmed it. Then Cesare asked for his name, and the innkeeper demanded 1 silver coin. Cesare paid, and the innkeeper informed him that the man had registered under the name Terios. Meanwhile, Aldous was doing his own work, as he was also suspicious of Cesare. This was obvious because Cesare's information was far more accurate than that of other brokers. The fact that Cesare also knew about Nale leaving Thoria could prove to be dangerous, although Aldous thought Cesare probably didn't know about him, and Nale fighting the Thorian army, since that event had been passed off as an accident. It was natural for them to hold a grudge against Aldous and Nale now, but at least they hadn't officially made them enemies yet. Out of shame and for some other reason, Aldous figured that Cesare was still holding back a piece of information that he might have to ask about tomorrow. The next day, Cesare informed him that the woman had become an enemy of the Thorian army, and that there was word the accident they'd had was actually a battle she had participated in. That battle resulted in many casualties, including a commanding officer and several mages and soldiers. Aldous realized that Cesare's information was definitely accurate, whereas the other info brokers only knew that an accident had occurred. Cesare said it was likely the woman had fled after her battle with the army. Aldous asked him if this information was accurate, and Cesare admitted that it had taken him a full day to verify it, and besides me, perhaps only the National Intelligence Agency knows anything about it. Aldous realized 6 days had passed since that battle, so unless Thoria was deliberately controlling the information, news of it should have spread all over the country by now. So it made sense that the Thorian army was keeping things quiet. Still, he suspected Cesare wasn't telling him the whole story, especially since he never mentioned that Aldous was there. It was just too strange that Cesare wouldn't have heard anything about him, since he was there with her from the monster battle all the way through this incident. Aldous wanted to take some precautions, so he decided to throw out some bait for Cesare to test his reaction. Aldous stood up, saying that was enough information for now. He told Cesare he was going to meet up with his comrades, since they planned on leaving the capital that afternoon. Aldous got up and said his goodbyes to Cesare, while Cesare politely replied that they might meet again if fate allowed it, all while wearing a forced smile. Later, as Aldous was on his way, a group of men suddenly called out and ordered him to stop. They were a group of mercenaries who were clearly there to capture him. Aldous stated that he couldn't recall doing anything that would warrant his arrest, to which the group replied that someone else wanted him captured. They immediately rushed in to attack Aldous, but with just a blast of wind, Aldous easily shattered their weapons, and then he took them down with close-quarter strikes. Aldous warned the attackers that he didn't even need to draw his sword to deal with them, and then he demanded they tell him the name of the person who hired them, or they would pay with their lives. The attacker told Aldous that it was Cesare who had sent them to capture him. Aldous knew where he had to go next. Meanwhile, Cesare was sitting in the same spot, happily drinking. The innkeeper asked him what had him in such a good mood, while Cesare thought to himself that the man who called himself Terios was actually Aldous, the guy who'd been working with the female mercenary. That meant Aldous would definitely know where to find the female mercenary. Cesare planned to find information on her and then sell it to the Lord of Thoria, who would surely be willing to pay a hefty sum for it. Cesare dreamed of moving to a nicer new house with the money and turning his life around. Then he heard a familiar voice call his name, which shocked Cesare. It was Aldous, completely unscathed. Cesare asked, "What are you doing here? I thought you were supposed to be leaving the capital." Aldous replied that while that was his original intention, Cesare's terrible manners had brought him back. Aldous tossed the helmet of one of the men who attacked him onto the table. Cesare was shocked. He knew the men he'd sent after Aldous were highly skilled. Aldous warned Cesare that his greed would bring him nothing but trouble, and that there wouldn't be a next time. Cesare understood that Aldous wasn't making an empty threat. Then, Aldous asked Cesare about a piece of information he had held back. Cesare asked for 2 silver coins for the information, and Aldous gave them to him as usual. Cesare then reported that news of the incident at the fortress had spread within Thoria, and it wouldn't be long before it reached the capital. Cesare confirmed that the Lord of Thoria hadn't announced anything about the incident, but he had no intention of letting those who had tarnished his image get away. Aldous realized that mercenaries might have already started looking for him, and Cesare could very well be one of them. Cesare claimed he was just in it for the money, and that the intel he had on the ones who wiped out the army at the fortress was that they were defeated by just 2 people, a young female mercenary and a man in violet. He said that those 2 might have had more allies and that Aldous shouldn't underestimate his skills as an informant. But that wasn't all. Cesare then mentioned that the Thorian lord didn't care about the twins. His focus was solely on the 2 mercenaries. Aldous was shocked to hear the twins mentioned, and he asked Cesare if that was all the information he had. Cesare confirmed it was, and when he asked Aldous what he wanted to know next, Aldous slammed his hand on the table, threatening that if Cesare ever revealed any information about the twins, he would personally hunt him to the ends of the earth and kill him. Cesare found this threat even more terrifying than the last. In a trembling voice, he said that kind of information was bound to get out eventually, so Aldous's threat was meaningless. Aldous didn't care how it sounded, he just wanted to keep Cesare under his thumb. Aldous didn't trust him one bit. The fact that Cesare's talent as an informant was undeniable only made him that much more valuable in Aldous's eyes. Aldous then fed Cesare a lie, saying that the mercenaries who fought the Thorian army had shown up in the capital 3 days ago, and had since left, heading toward the Empire. Cesare asked Aldous what he meant by that, and Aldous simply replied that he was providing him with information. Cesare hated being forced to spread false information, but he knew if he didn't, Aldous would kill him. Cesare didn't guarantee that things would go as Aldous thought, but Aldous just wanted to be sure to reduce any possibility of a situation similar to the incident at the fortress with the twins. Aldous wondered if he should run away somewhere farther, when Cesare spoke up and asked Aldous if he was really as strong as the rumors claimed. Cesare advised Aldous to go and make a name for himself by defeating the 3 great demons. Cesare said that proving it publicly that no one was a match for Aldous could help him achieve what he wanted. The mention of the 3 great demons piqued Aldous's interest. Cesare asked Aldous for a copper coin, as everyone here knew about them. The 3 demons started with the Bell Seeker, a creature whose territory was at the foot of the Cannabis Mountains. It was a rare mutation of the low-level monster Tron, with strength comparable to a grinder, and was said to be attracted to the sound of bells. Aldous mentioned that if it was really as strong as a grinder, it could be eliminated at any time. Cesare said that it might not be as Aldous speculated, and then continued that, if Aldous defeated these 3 monsters, the country would be overjoyed. The second monster was called Four Wings, which nested on a small island near the royal capital. It was a giant bird monster with 2 heads and large wings. It had been causing chaos in the neighboring waters, but the country didn't have time to eliminate it due to the tense situation with the Empire. Cesare said that defeating even one of those monsters would make Aldous be seen as a hero. When Aldous asked about the final monster, but Cesare said there wasn't much information about that one. He only knew that it might be residing in the Caucasus forest, under the name Red Eater. Aldous wondered why there was only speculation about it, to which Cesare explained that no one had ever survived an encounter with it. People only said that it appeared on the night of a full moon, and the only witness was a powerful swordsman who emerged from the forest heavily injured on the verge of death. That swordsman had uttered 2 words before he breathed his last: Red and Eaten. Many had also observed that on the night of a full moon, the Caucasus forest echoed with the sounds of monsters running around, possibly because of the Red Eater. Many witnesses said they were fleeing from something, and the monsters ran without paying any attention to them, as if they were terrified. Afterward, most people who entered the forest on a full moon never returned. That was all they knew about the Red Eater. So, Aldous figured it might just be speculation. Cesare confirmed there wasn't much information to verify anything, so he had included the Red Eater on the list simply because 3 great demons sounded more appealing than 2. Aldous returned to the main topic. If the Red Eater was removed from the list, defeating the remaining 2 monsters would make his name stand out in the capital. Cesare agreed with him, and Cesare added that no sane person would want to risk their life against such powerful monsters. Aldous thought that he should do this for the children, because whether Thoria was hunting them or not, they had still been hurt. If being with Aldous was the safest place for them, then standing out might not be a bad idea. Then, he asked if Cesare would be here in the evening, and when Cesare said yes, Aldous said that he would see him again in the evening, as everything would be over by then. Cesare only just realized that evening was approaching, so he agreed. But then he suddenly registered the last part and wondered what Aldous had just said. Meanwhile, in the mountains, some adventurers seemed to be carrying out a quest, and they were very relaxed because all they knew was that bell seekers only reacted to the sound of metal. They had no choice but to head in this direction, as the herbs required for their quest could only be found in these areas. He also reassured the others that they were unlikely to encounter any tragedy. But then one of them slipped, and they realized that the person's luggage was making a metallic sound as it got caught on a bell attached to a corpse. The others guessed it was probably someone who had tried to take on the Bell Seeker. But now, thanks to that corpse, they were all about to die because the Bell Seeker had appeared at the sound of the bell. All the adventurers were now doomed, as they knew the Bell Seeker wouldn't let them live for long. As the Bell Seeker charged towards one of them, the others tried everything to stop the monster. But nothing they did could stop it or even put a scratch on the Bell Seeker, as its body was too hard. The Bell Seeker threw the shield bearer away with just one attack, simultaneously crushing the shield with its powerful fangs. None of them had any strength left to fight or any hope of survival. Then, at that moment, Aldous finally arrived and threw his sword towards the Bell Seeker. He felt lucky to have found the Bell Seeker without having to lure it out with a bell. And now, it was a battle between Aldous and one of the three great monsters. The adventurers tried to warn Aldous to stay away from this dangerous monster, but Aldous replied that he already knew that as he jumped down to them from the cliff. The Bell Seeker didn't hesitate to attack Aldous immediately. Aldous didn't hold back this time, even though people were watching him. He sliced off one of the Bell Seeker's legs without any difficulty, and the adventurers were astonished by his extraordinary power. Bell Seeker fell, and Aldous wanted to finish this monster off quickly. Then Bell Seeker let out a scream, and everyone was surprised to see it regenerate its leg in the blink of an eye before vanishing from their sight. But for Aldous, he could easily keep up with Bell Seeker's invisibility. He moved around, using his magical energy to sense its location. The adventurers were witnessing a battle on a level they had never seen before. Aldous took a firm stance, and as he aimed at Bell Seeker with intense concentration, he tracked its movements and successfully stabbed it with his sword. Aldous stabbed his sword into the monster's mouth to keep it from moving. After that, all he needed to do was chop it into pieces so small that it couldn't regenerate. The adventurers could only see Aldous's swords, empowered by magic, flying through the air, hacking Bell Seeker to pieces like a common side of meat. Aldous left Bell Seeker's head intact, as he wanted to keep it as proof of its extermination. Thinking that might not be enough, Aldous burned the rest of the monster's corpse to ashes. He thought that would suffice, and the adventurers witnessed everything he did from up close. Afterward, Aldous took only Bell Seeker's head and went on to find the next monster. One of the adventurers asked for his name, and he proudly introduced himself as Aldous before leaving. Next, he soared into the sky using flight magic, and arrived at the island surrounding the royal capital, which was said to be the home of the next great monster. While assessing the surrounding area, Aldous suddenly noticed something in the sky. A large shadow suddenly attacked him. Aldous dodged just in time and realized that this large bird must be the Four Wings monster, as its description perfectly matched what he knew. This monster was larger than Aldous had anticipated, but he had no time to think, as the monster had no intention of waiting for him. It attacked immediately. Aldous dodged the next attack and noticed the monster begin to gather magic around its wings. Four Wings launched a wind magic attack toward Aldous, which he blocked with his magic shield. Aldous realized that this attack would make it harder to get close to Four Wings, so he planned to launch fire spears at its wings. But his spells didn't have the necessary range to reach the monster. While Four Wings was recharging, Aldous was surprised to realize the monster was firing powerful electric shocks at him. Aldous guessed this was like light magic, with the ability to reach its target instantly. However, it was hard to predict where the electric shocks would appear. He tried to dodge, but the electric attacks always surrounded his magic shield. Aldous understood why ships couldn't withstand this monster's attacks. To defeat it, he needed to close the distance. First, he needed to make the electric attacks easier to track. So Aldous dove straight into the sea, and used fire magic to heat the water, creating steam. The steam enveloped Four Wings just as he had planned, and now Aldous could easily track the subsequent electric attacks. He threw his swords and controlled them with magic to strike Four Wings' wings, dealing some damage to it. Then Aldous threw another sword, and this time he completely severed one of the monster's wings. Four Wings began to shriek in pain, while Aldous was already preparing for his next attack. The monster tried to stay balanced in the air with its remaining wings, but before it could react, Aldous shot upward and sliced off the monster's head. The mission was a clean success. Afterward, Aldous returned to the capital with the monster's heads in his hands, which left everyone around him stunned, as they couldn't believe that someone had actually taken the heads of both Bell Seeker and Four Wings. As he walked through the streets, people couldn't stop talking, while Cesare was also astonished to see the monster's heads. Aldous carried them as if it were no big deal, and he greeted Cesare as if they were old friends. Aldous asked him where he should turn in these heads to collect the reward. Cesare was stunned at first. He needed a moment to confirm that the heads truly belonged to the two great beasts. Unable to believe that Aldous could have defeated them when he had only heard about them that morning, Aldous replied that it had been more than enough time, leaving Cesare speechless. Now Cesare couldn't doubt Aldous's skill, and he informed him that the heads could be taken to a guard post or the knight's headquarters to claim the reward, Everyone in the tavern stared at the strange sight until Aldous approached the server and announced that drinks were on him for everyone there today. She was shocked that he would offer up such a large sum of money, and the crowd would never turn down the offer of free alcohol. People kept asking Aldous for his name, and he happily gave it to them as they raised their glasses in a toast. The people cheered for the young man who had defeated 2 great beasts and toasted his name. Afterward, as soon as the news about the Bellseeker and the Four Wings was announced, the capital buzzed with festivities, and thanks to those who had witnessed Aldous's power with their own eyes, his fame quickly spread to every corner of the city. Those who had planned to kidnap him had now given up on the idea, and this good news brought Aldous a bit of relief. Cesare was just as pleased, as he no longer had to worry about being threatened by Aldous. Not only that, but Cesare was bombarded with questions about his relationship with the monster conqueror. They pestered him about all sorts of things, but Aldous told him not to interrupt his breakfast. Cesare mentioned that he had actually come with some valuable information. He realized that Aldous had used him to make a name for himself, and now it was only fair that he get some credit for telling Aldous about the 3 great beasts. Cesare assured him that he was well aware of Aldous's power, so he wouldn't dare to secretly move against him. It was simply that Cesare wanted to maintain a good relationship with Aldous, and when it came to business, he always put his trust in him. Aldous realized that Cesare had a very strong will, so he agreed to tell him about the 2 beasts he had slain. At that point, Cesare asked Aldous how he had managed to take down the Four Wings in such a short amount of time. Aldous replied that the price for that information would be 500 gold, an astronomical sum. He realized that Aldous had certainly gained fame from this conquest, and now even nationwide organizations would be eager to recruit him. Cesare asked Aldous if he had ever considered a change in profession, but Aldous just remained silent. Cesare didn't want to pry too deeply into his personal life, so he asked if Aldous would rather have a good referral for a high-paying request, or simply information on the last of the 3 great beasts, the Red Eater. Aldous showed interest in learning more about it. Cesare then said he would look into it if Aldous wanted. Aldous replied that he didn't need him to, as his goal had been to stop anyone from thinking of bothering him, and he had accomplished that. He had no need to hunt any more monsters, but the Red Eater worried him because Nail and the twins were living there. Upon his return, Aldous informed Nele that everything had gone according to plan, and she praised her lord for his hard work. However, the only problem Aldous faced was that he was always surrounded whenever he went into the city, as people enjoyed calling him a hero. He just laughed at being called a hero for such trivial matters. Then he wondered what would happen if he were truly strong enough to become a real hero. Nele noticed his pensive mood and asked if something was troubling him. Aldous snapped out of his thoughts and told Nail about the Red Eater. There was a chance the beast would appear on the full moon in 3 days, so they needed to be on guard for it. Afterwards, Aldous wanted to spend some time relaxing since he hadn't been with the twins for a while. Just then, the 2 children appeared at the door. They had heard what Aldous just said and were ready to play with him. They quickly surrounded Aldous and began to play with him. Afterwards, the 4 of them played house together, where Aldous and Nail were the parents and Philia and Rihanna were the children. Aldous found it difficult to keep up with the game, and the role of being a father made him even more nervous. He told Nail to say something a mother would say, and when she received the order from her lord, Nail completely changed, starting to act as if she were really the girl's mother, with Aldous as the twins' father. Nail fulfilled her role perfectly. Afterward, Aldous and Philia watered the plants together. Aldous started to feel tired, so he said he was going to rest for a bit. He realized that playing family with the kids was more exhausting than fighting, and now he needed to rest properly so he wouldn't make the same mistake as before when he'd fallen asleep and let the girls wander off. Aldous always wondered why he'd become sleepier after coming to this world, but he figured it was probably a normal change. He used wind magic to create a makeshift bed, then added a blanket to make it as comfortable as possible. He knew Philia and Rihanna would laugh at him for his clumsiness in trying to rest like this. After a while, the twins wanted to see what Aldous was doing, and they came closer to check on him. Nayla replied that he was just taking a nap. She noticed that the girls didn't seem to have recovered from their fear of strange objects yet. The 2 children got closer to Aldous and saw that he was fast asleep. They felt like playing a prank on him right now, so they started pulling his cheeks and playing with the headband he always wore. After a few minutes, Nail saw that the twin sisters had also fallen asleep with Aldous, and this peaceful scene was not something you'd often see in the middle of the Caucasus Forest, a place teeming with monsters. She thought that these girls were truly lucky that Aldous had taken them in, And while the amount of suffering humans had to endure was immeasurable, the fact that he'd extended a helping hand to two children who just happened to appear before him was truly meaningful. She was sure Aldous hadn't thought twice about taking the sisters in, and his kindness was truly admirable. She felt happy for them as she placed a blanket over the girls. She was also content to focus on her mission of protecting the two sisters, but she was eagerly waiting to see what kind of life these two sisters would lead under her master, Aldous, who would be their guide. Suddenly, she felt she'd thought too much. Then, Nele noticed something on Aldous's forehead. Under his headband, there seemed to be a mark that Nele knew for certain must be hidden for some reason. She adjusted the band on his forehead and continued her mission of protecting them. Meanwhile, it seemed that somewhere in the Caucasus forest, another danger was about to strike. And it wasn't just a single entity, but hundreds of different creatures forming from a location that resembled a laboratory or research center. Inside, a completely transparent female creature seemed to be waiting for something. The full moon. Tonight was the night of the full moon, and the forest seemed to feel different than on other normal days. Aldous lay in his bed, sensing that something was wrong outside. Nele came and informed him that there were strange noises coming from outside the forest. They both sensed something approaching them from within the forest. It was actually beasts and monsters. Individually, they weren't very strong, but with such an unusual number of them all together, Aldous knew he had to do something. He tasked Nele with looking after the twin girls, and told her to escape into the sky if things got too dangerous. Then, Aldous headed into the forest under the full moon to see what was in his way. He noticed the monsters had gotten very close, and immediately a hound appeared in his sight. Aldous noticed the hound's eyes weren't looking at him, but he had to cut it down right here and now anyway. Aldous knew these monsters weren't actually dangerous, since they couldn't see him. Or perhaps they were just trying to flee. Nevertheless, Aldous still finished off the hounds and wondered what had made them so wary. Before long, it wasn't just one or two hounds, but a whole pack of monsters coming from the forest. Aldous could handle them easily, but the problem was that if he used large-scale magic here, it would attract too much attention. Besides, these monsters were fleeing from something. So he flew up and headed back towards his home. There, Nele was already in the air with the twin girls in her arms. Aldous apologized for not being able to stop them. They all agreed that it couldn't be helped, as the scale of this monster stampede was unprecedented. They had no choice but to get away from their home, which was now being trampled by the massive horde of monsters, destroying everything they had built over the past few days. The twin girls were terrified as they watched their home being destroyed like that, and that scene lasted for some time until everything turned to ash. Aldous knew he couldn't do anything about it. Then he heard the sobbing of the little girls, who were crying after losing their home once again. Aldous went closer and reassured them that everything would be all right, and that they could rebuild everything. Looking at the ruins left below, he had his worries, but thankfully Nele had buried their belongings deep underground. Aldous noticed some monsters down there in the rubble, creatures that had lost their balance and died from being trampled by their own kind. However, it seemed too quiet now. As he looked to the other side of the forest, Aldous saw mysterious things approaching them. Figures that looked human-like but were transparent. Aldous wondered what these creatures were, and noticed they just glided past him as if they had no hostile intent. Aldous realized that these creatures were actually heading towards the corpses of the monsters. As they got near the dead bodies, they suddenly turned around. Aldous wondered what they were doing. And suddenly the corpses transformed, their heads turning into sharp jaws with hundreds of flesh-tearing teeth. The twin girls were terrified at the sight of these monsters eating their own kind. After they finished eating, the dark creatures turned red, and the red ones were then devoured by the black ones as if they had no sense of unity or intelligence. The monsters suddenly began to cannibalize each other, and Aldous noticed that these creatures reacted to anything red. This time he understood that they must all be red eaters. And suddenly one of them noticed Aldous and the others as prey. Aldous moved to slash the red eater, and found that its body was quite solid, forcing him to use extra strength to cut it to pieces. Aldous thought to himself that if they were all this tough, he would have trouble facing so many of them. He warned Nele that they had recognized them as enemies, so she should take the girls far away. Nal immediately obeyed, while Aldous stayed behind to fight these monsters. He used his sword magic to its fullest extent and began tearing them to pieces, one by one. Their bodies were as hard as iron, and every time he destroyed one, another would charge in to attack from a different direction. So far, Aldous could still dodge their attacks. But with their combined strength, weight, and numbers, the Red Eaters might be the strongest monsters he had ever faced. Aldous was currently holding his ground and had eliminated about half of them. As night fell deeper, Aldous began to feel like he was just repeating everything. Nal asked if he needed any help, but Aldous refused and told Nail to make sure she kept the girls safe. He wanted to figure out a way to defeat all these monsters, but it seemed their numbers were increasing. Philia and Rihanna shouted that more Red Eaters were coming this way. Aldous was annoyed by this situation, and he knew he couldn't guarantee the girls' safety if this continued. These monsters seemed to appear in certain numbers, so he told Nail to fly up into the air and, if things got worse, to leave the forest. Nali asked if Aldous was going to stay here, and Aldous replied that these monsters were coming from the east. Aldous declared that he would go and deal with the source of these monsters. He told the girls not to worry and to go with Nail, promising he would be back soon. The girls didn't object and followed Nail as they were told. Nale was a little worried about Aldous dealing with these monsters alone as he went deeper into the forest. Then, Aldous flew up above the forest and headed towards the place where the Red Eaters were appearing. Along the way, he noticed the number of these monsters was constantly increasing. During that time, he sensed a large source of magical power in the target area. When he arrived, Aldous looked down from above and discovered a structure had appeared in the middle of the forest. He was surprised to see such a laboratory, as he never expected a place like that to exist here. It reminded him of a place he had once seen in his own world, and the Red Eaters were densely packed around the building. Aldous wanted to try something, so he focused a massive amount of his magical power and compressed it all into a small sphere. This required a great deal of concentration, but he eventually succeeded in sending this compressed bomb of light magic and placing it among the Red Eaters inside the building. The bomb of light magic detonated, dealing a massive amount of damage to the entire area. But Aldous didn't stop there. He formed hundreds of sharp stones and rained them all down on that building. He continued to attack the structure relentlessly. Just when he thought he had tried everything, he realized that this building wasn't so easily damaged. The building was still standing and didn't even have a scratch on it after so many powerful attacks. Aldous decided to check out the building up close, so he landed at the facility's gate and kicked the door down to get inside. But what awaited him there was another door in a dark room.